especially through the early hours, and we'll see rain returning to Northern Ireland as well overnight. Again, much of England and Wales staying dry. A milder night than last night. Temperatures mostly holding up in double figures. On to the details for Friday, and we'll be watching this band of rain as it sinks southwards. Could be quite heavy, starting off across southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, heading quite quickly into northern England, then into parts of Wales. Either side of that, reasonably bright skies and just a few showers. But as this sinks southwards, could turn into quite a lively line of heavy rain, not lasting too long, but intense rain and squally winds where they just suddenly pick up over parts of the Midlands, Lincolnshire, South Wales and southwest England come the afternoon. Eventually getting into East Anglia in the southeast. For Friday evening's rush hour, M25 could see a lot of rain in a short space of time. Following on from that, we'll see plenty of showers packing into western Scotland, Northern Ireland and northwest England. Into the weekend, though, the showers fading. Many places looking dry on Saturday. We are expecting some rain on Sunday, though, for Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
This is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys, with you all the way through until 6 p.m. and I'm bang up for it today, ladies and gentlemen, because coming up, Liz Truss is off to meet the enemy, the EU, as their leaders look to help her sort out the migration and energy crisis. Who needs friends, eh? Who needs friends? Well, the Prime Minister, who has endured a difficult few days after a Conservative Party conference, will, within the next couple of hours, apparently, hold key bilateral meetings with the French President Emmanuel Macron. Somebody, she said, may be a friend or maybe a foe. I'm pretty sure the people who died when he allegedly nicked some of our vaccines may not think he's too friendly. Is it about time that we're a bit nicer to the EU? Can we salvage our relationship with France? I'm a little bit concerned that some Brexiteers in this country now appear to be softening their rhetoric towards the European Union. Is Truss the right leader to guide us through the latest European Union wave? Also this hour, could we be on the verge of a mass walkout for our NHS nurses? The head of the Royal College of Nursing says the only way to prevent nurses leaving the NHS and to fill thousands of vacancies is to pay them a decent wage. Do you happen to know what they're already on? 2 pay rises in 2 years, but there we go. If nurses walk out, people will die at the end of the day. GB Views at gbnews.uk. We're going to be running this throughout the show. Do you support a potential nurses' strike? For the first time in its 106-year history, the RCN is asking all of its UK members if they are prepared to walk out over pay. Where will this decision leave patients? very, very unwell, I imagine. They've had 2 pay rises in 2 years, as I've said. And have we, as a country now, become immune to knife crime? It seems to be happening every single day on Britain's streets. Today, 3 people, 3, have been stabbed as members of the public apparently tried to intervene in a phone snatch robbery in central London. Have a go, heroes, as we understand it. And when it went round that it wasn't terror, people seem to lose interest. Why? Why have we normalised rampant knife crime on the streets of Britain? We'll get the very latest, but before that, it is the latest news.
Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 3. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Power blackouts may have to be introduced in the UK this winter if the country fails to secure enough natural gas, a watchdog has warned. The National Grid electricity system operator, which oversees the network, has cautioned some homes may be without power for up to 3 hours a day. 3 possible scenarios have been drawn up. The blackouts would be the most severe, but it has said that is unlikely. Coal-fired power plants are also being placed on standby as Europe struggles with a restricted gas supply following Russia's war with Ukraine. At least 38 people have been killed, including 22 children, some as young as 2, after a former police officer opened fire at a childcare centre in Thailand. It happened in the northeastern province of Nong Bua Lampu. Thai police say the gunman had been discharged from the force last year and had just hours earlier appeared in court on drugs charges. The gunman also killed his wife and his child before turning the gun on himself. Bangkok-based journalist Janine Paknitam told us incidents like this are rare.
Thailand has a lot of drug issues, and the government has been quite active on that. But what I think is very important is to pay close attention to the frequency of the mass shooting is actually happened in Thailand. This is a rare occurrence because the last one that happened was in February 2020. That happened because a disgruntled former soldier, he started shooting at a military barrack and then he went to the mall. That shooting actually resulted in 29 people.
Meanwhile, back here, 3 people have been stabbed in a suspected robbery in Bishopsgate near Liverpool Street Station. City of London police confirmed the victims have been taken to hospital. Their condition isn't thought to be life-threatening. The force is still looking for 2 suspects. No arrests have yet been made. The Prime Minister has called on European leaders to unite as she warns Russian aggression has caused the biggest crisis since the Second World War. Liz Truss has been speaking in Prague at the historic first meeting of a new political club of nations. She's urged the group to address the fundamental causes of energy and migration challenges. Ms Truss is now set to hold talks with French President Emmanuel Macron in what could mark a new phase in the UK's post-Brexit relations with Europe. Hate crimes in England and Wales have increased by 26% in the last year, but police are prosecuting a small proportion of those offenders. Official figures show there were over 155,000 hate crimes recorded by officers up to March this year. It's the biggest increase in hate crimes in 5 years. But the number of offences resulting in a police charge are at 8% of the total recorded. Around 500 emergency call handlers have joined a BT Group walkout today in a dispute over pay. The Communication Workers Union, which represents BT workers, had previously agreed to exempt 999 staff from the strike action. The CWU says the position has changed after widespread outrage at the company's refusal to negotiate. A further 3 days of walkouts are planned to take place later this month. The union's General Secretary Dave Ward told GB News BT are upping the ante.
I mean, it cannot be right that call centre workers earning between £21,000 and £27,000 a year are having to go on strike. They're at a tipping point. The actual situation with BT is that they are refusing to negotiate. They've had 2.5 weeks' notice of this dispute. We would rather be in a room sitting with them today trying to get this dispute resolved than being out on strike.
At least 17 people, mostly women, have died after 2 boats sank in separate incidents in Greek waters. Dramatic footage shows some of those rescued being pulled up a cliff to safety. Coast Guard say 30 people are still missing from the two wrecks. It's understood one boat off the coast of Lesbos was carrying around 40 migrants when it sank overnight. 80 more were rescued from another, which sank late on Wednesday near the island of Katira. And Kevin Spacey is due to appear in a US court to face an allegation he sexually assaulted a boy 36 years ago. Actor Anthony Rapp claims he was the victim of an unwanted sexual advance at a party in 1986 when he was 14 years old. The trial comes less than 3 months after the Oscar-winning actor appeared in a UK court where he faces a separate 5 charges of sexual assault. Mr. Spacey denies all of the accusations against him. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Patrick.
Would you support a nurses' strike? For the first time in its 106-year history, the Royal College of Nursing is asking all of its UK members if they are prepared to walk out over pay. Well, bear in mind that nurses were given a 3% pay rise in July 2021 and a pay rise of more than 4% in July this year, and they're still not happy. The starting salary of a nurse in England is just above, reportedly, £27,000. I just want to know, what was your first salary? What was your starting salary? It can rise to around 55k. Now, if the Royal College of Nurses vote to go on strike, it says the strike will only impact non-urgent care. Only? Only non-urgent care? Well, what's not urgent now can very quickly become urgent, can't it? A non-urgent condition can still be debilitating and indeed painful. I think this potentially could be an absolute liberty. People always go, don't they? Oh, well, they worked very hard through the COVID crisis. Yes, nurses did work incredibly hard throughout the COVID crisis. There's no doubt about that. And we did financially, however, cripple the country in order to support them. We shut down the country to protect the NHS. Nurses work very hard. They save lives. But that is the job at the end of the day, and I want to know what you think about whether or not you would support a nurse's pay rise. Times are tough. Have times changed? Did you not support one, but now maybe you do support a pay rise and indeed a strike if they don't get it? Is 2 pay rises in 2 years not good enough? Shock horror, nurses did have to work harder during a global pandemic, and we do owe them a lot. But a 10.5% pay rise now, which is what they want? Really? Is that the right thing, do you think? GBViews at gbnews.uk. Get in touch, because my concern is that if nurses go on strike, then people die, and would that leave them with blood on their hands? GBViews at gbnews.uk. I want to hear from you. I went out and asked the general public what they felt about the potential for a pay rise and also whether or not they would support a nurses' strike.
My mum used to be a nurse, and I think they're undervalued. They're providing a great service, and particularly during the pandemic, they put their lives on the line.
So they're underpaid?
Totally.
Do you know roughly what they're paid now?
Probably about 25 to about 35,000.
Yeah, on average about 34. So what would you pay them if you had a money tree?
I think probably, it's very difficult to put a value on it, but 40,000.
Well, I have seen their basic pay isn't very good. And I think they are too important not to pay well.
Roughly what would you pay them in your dream world?
I think it just needs to be in line with a typical salary in order that you can live comfortably.
I would say it depends on how much of the strike affects the health. Okay, yeah. So it depends on how long they do it, or if they're doing it for a specific amount of time, whether they have enough resources to cover the actual health problems and maybe emergency problems and issues that people could face. So when they are on a strike, they should still care about the well-being of the people that they are looking for.
Everybody clapped during COVID, didn't they? Let's clap for the NHS. And now when it really comes to it and people are really suffering and they need a decent wage for a job that is needed.
Yeah, really contentious issue, this one, and I want to hear from you because we're going to be discussing it throughout the show. The possibility of a mass walkout of nurses. GBViews at gbnews.uk. A couple of key points. We did shut down the country to protect the NHS. That has led to us essentially being financially crippled. Is that enough? Do we have to pay nurses more as well? Or do nurses deserve a pay rise because they do extremely tough work and the cost of living crisis is going up? Very much two sides to this one, but I want to hear from you because it's getting people very angry, especially if you're waiting for what they would call non-urgent care. GBviews at gbnews.uk. But moving on from that for now, Prime Minister Liz Truss has arrived in Prague, the stag-do capital of the world, for the first summit of the European political community. She's due to hold a number of meetings with different European leaders where she'll reiterate the support for Ukraine and push for collective action on both energy security and migration. So in under 2 hours, she'll meet her friend or foe, President Macron, where she is expected to discuss the migrant crisis. And earlier, the German ambassador to the UK said Liz Truss's attendance at the summit in Prague sends a signal that we want to cooperate. Well, there we are. We can go live now to Prague and speak to GB News' political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, it looks beautiful there. I will not ask you how you're enjoying the stag-do capital of the world. Instead, we'll get right down to business. What's going on? What's going on where you are?
Well, that actual crucial meeting with Emmanuel Macron is due to start, within the next hour or so. The Prime Minister making it clear, it must be said this week, actually, at Body Conference, so it's widely reported, that she does view Emmanuel Macron, apparently, as a friend, and that was merely banter during the summer when she suggested that it was still up for grabs whether he was a friend or foe. Clearly, I think the government, frankly, Patrick, have made a decision that if they want to tackle the small boat crisis in the English Channel, that they simply need French cooperation, and actually they need cooperation across the whole of Europe. Migration, the troubles, the problems, the issues around it are not something that's merely confined to the United Kingdom. It's something that actually all of Europe's been grappling with over the last decade or so. Interestingly, though, Liz Truss has been writing in the Times newspaper today, trying to set out why she's here in Prague. She says that lots of these vital issues around migration, around energy security, around the war in Ukraine affect the whole continent. So it is right that we find common cause with our European friends and allies, including those non-EU countries like Ukraine, like Norway, like Switzerland, who are also here today. She says today's meeting is not an EU construct or an alternative European Union, though it is the idea of the French President Emmanuel Macron. She arrived a couple of hours ago, or around lunchtime, here in Prague, met with the Czech Prime Minister. She's also got a meeting with Mark Rutte, the Dutch Prime Minister, a little later on. Seeing lots of images of her meeting leaders. It all seems terribly very warm and jovial and friendly. As you may well expect, this is our second big kind of international trip, and her fundamental argument is she needs to be around the table at these meetings on these kind of big issues to get Britain's voice heard. But clearly, Down Street a little bit cautious about this idea that somehow it's EU light.
Very much. Darren McCaffrey, our political editor there, out in Prague as we prepare for Liz Truss to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron, a chap, of course, who she said may well be a friend or may well be a foe. Are you concerned at the moment, or otherwise, that potentially we're softening our approach as a nation towards the European Union? There seems to be a move in the mood music coming out of the Conservative Party at the moment that we need to be at pains to be seen to be nice to the European Union when it comes to issues like Northern Ireland, or crucially, as will be discussed today, about what's going on in the Channel. Do you think that's the right thing to do, or do you think it might not be? Have the EU been particularly nice to us? We are giving the French rather a lot of money to do absolutely naff all in the Channel. GBviews at gbnews.uk. But moving back now to one of our big stories of the day, if not the big story of the day for us here on GB News Live, and it's that potential nurses' strike, a potential nurses' walkout, because the Royal College of Nursing is balloting its members for strike action for the first time in its 106-year history. Around 300,000 nurses will vote whether to walk out over pay. They are calling for a rise of 5% above inflation increase. It comes amid warnings that record numbers of nurses are leaving the NHS, some of them doing things like going and working in bars because they reckon the hours are more sociable and they can earn a bit more bang for their buck, as it were. So the RCN's General Secretary says the only way to prevent nurses leaving is to pay them a, quote, decent wage. But I've got a lot of info on this. I'm looking forward to getting stuck into it. And the emails have been flooding in as well. A mixed bag, to say the least, when it comes to whether or not you at home, you listening in your cars or on radio around your house or online, would support a nurses' strike. A lot of nurses getting in touch with me, and I'd love to see it. I'll go to them shortly. The result of the ballot is going to be due next month, so we'll find out next month whether or not they are going to strike. But joining me on the show now is NHS doctor and producer of the documentary The Great NHS Heist. It's Dr. Bob Gill. Dr. Bob, thank you very, very much. Firstly, let's have a kind of barometer of where you stand on this. Are nurses paid enough for the job they do?
Well, clearly not, because there's a problem with recruitment and retention. We knew even before the pandemic struck, there were 40,000 nurse vacancies. The NHS is struggling, as you described, and what that means for nurses is they are having to cover absent staff on the wards, and this makes it dangerous for patients. So fundamentally, the nurses are being forced into quite drastic action as a result of the government's real terms pay cut over the last decade of 20% plus.
What I find interesting with that, Dr. Bob, is, technically, if my salary hasn't gone up in the last, let's say, 6 months since the cost of living crisis has gone up, have I not had a real terms pay cut? Has everyone not really had a real terms pay cut unless their own personal salary has gone up in line with inflation? And can I just add to that as well? We did shut down the country to protect the NHS. That has, in part, financially crippled us, cost many people their jobs. I'm sure plenty of people would do it again. Plenty of people might not do it again. Do we owe the nurses even more money now?
Well, I can't see the connection between the government's choice to lock down and the nurses' pay demand. These are
we're going to have to get rid of him, I'm afraid. The signal's terrible.
Issues. And it wasn't taken to ease the load of nursing staff. What we're dealing with is a massive problem of staffing the NHS safely, and unless you reward staff properly, they will leave. The problem will...
Yeah, Dr. Bob, I'm sorry about this. Unfortunately, the signal's too bad. I'm not trying to cut you off. Apologies, but Dr. Bob Gill there, NHS doctor and indeed an activist, his signal was appalling. We literally couldn't hear him. So joining me in the studio right now, though, helpfully, is Sarah Jane Palmer, who is a nurse and writer. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks.
Good, right. Well, unfortunately, it was a bit short and sweet with Dr. Bob. We might be able to get him back if his signal improves. Where are you on the idea of a nurse's pay rise, then?
Well, I think 5% is quite a good offer, considering everyone's experiencing a real terms pay cut anyway. I think 10% is asking for quite a lot in a cost of living crisis that's happening for everyone.
Can you just break this down for our viewers and our listeners? Because so it's a 5% pay rise plus essentially 10% in line with inflation. Is that right?
Oh, I think they're wanting 10%. Was it 10% in total they're wanting?
So, no, so my understanding is it's 10% plus, which is a rate of inflation, plus about another 5% as well.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of money, right?
Yeah,
so,
basically too much.
So you think it's so you do think it's too much
yes,
money?
I think so. I think when you go into nursing, you want to do it not for the money, but for looking after people. It's like a moral calling. And, yeah, I don't think it would be right at all to strike as well. It's morally reprehensible, yeah.
So that's a really interesting point, because forget the financials for a second and talk to me a bit about the moral side of things. Because, look, if I went on strike, frankly, a lot of people might breathe a sigh of relief. But if nurses go on strike, people might die.
Yeah, exactly.
Would nurses have blood on their hands if they went on strike?
I think so, yeah, because a lot of procedures, they say they do emergency procedures, but what about all the biopsies that could detect cancers and things like that? Early diagnosis is everything, but that will be missed, and then people will suffer as a result. There'll be unnecessary deaths, and there'll be hospital readmissions for other patients as well. That a lot can go wrong from just one day of strike action, yeah.
And I think a lot of people, not everyone, some people get great care on the NHS. And it must be said, my family has received the full mixed bag, right? Some tremendous life-saving procedures and some absolute shockers. And I think that's a relatively accurate snapshot of the nation. And I can't help but wonder whether or not people's sympathy for the NHS and for those who work within it, i.e. nurses, is already a little bit limited. And then if they go on strike, I don't think they bring the people with them.
No, I think sympathy for them is waning, really, and there's a lot of problems with very long waiting lists at the moment and long waiting times for GP appointments, things like that. There's a lot of problems with the NHS, and I don't think the public will be on the side of the nurses really, once they see the consequence of it in particular.
But then I suppose what's the alternative? Because if we don't pay nurses more and we don't therefore recruit enough nurses and nurses leave, then we have a health crisis anyway, don't we?
Yeah, I think really the problem with staff retention is more down to the culture. There's a lot of problems with bullying and harassment within the NHS. Yeah, and a lot of issues with management. I think they could really get some money from changing the whole hierarchy and structure of management and use that for the nurses, if anything, or just in helping the NHS improve. I don't think money should go to the nurses. I think it should be to the whole system, really.
And you work as a nurse, is that right?
Yeah, I left a Band 7 job at the end of last year, but at the moment I'm doing... I've got 250 publications. I'm a writer for different national nursing journals.
Okay.
So I'm still a registered nurse.
So your experience, your first-hand personal experience of being a nurse...
Yeah.
...was that you didn't feel underpaid for the job that you were doing?
No, it was never about the pay. It was always about the culture. I felt that it was very institutionalised. Some wards were just lacking in the principles that you need, the values that you sign up to as a nurse.
In what sense? Go on, just expand on that.
Just sometimes like an uncaring attitude. There was a healthcare assistant I complained about once because she slept 3 hours through the night shift on a chair by a patient's bedside, and she was supposed to be helping me turn a patient with a hypoxic brain injury who needed 2 people, but I couldn't turn them without her. And it was very stressful. It felt like a lot of people just stayed in the job for many years and they got away with things that were uncaring and that really you could be sacked for. And there's a real issue with bullying as well.
Okay.
So it drives people out and they don't want to stay. So I think even if nurses were offered more money, they... I don't think it's a real incentive.
OK, well, just stay where you are. That's great, Sarah Jane Palmer there. I believe we might have now resuscitated Dr Bob Gill, who I think is with us. Dr Bob, are you there? Sorry about that, Dr Bob. It sounded like you were underwater for a second there. So let me kind of start it again with you. I don't know if you caught a bit of what Sarah was saying then. What she was saying is she was a nurse. She didn't feel underpaid for what she did. She felt that maybe nurses are treating it more as a job than a vocation. In that sense, where do you stand on that?
Well, if she's correct, there will be a low turnout for the ballot and there won't be a decision in favour of strike action. I strongly suspect she's completely wrong. And if we want to reverse the problem of retention and recruitment, then you have to pay staff adequately. And this government has chosen not to do that. And that's where the problem, that's one of the key problems with nursing retention.
So you, as a doctor, are telling a nurse that she's wrong?
No, I'm telling her she's drifting off into spurious territory. The ballot has been called for pay. It hasn't been called for
she said she didn't
the
feel
NHS
underpaid for the
or
job.
the management. It's strictly about pay. And
on that strictly about pay, just keen to get your views on this, because from an outsider, I'm not a nurse, obviously. It would be a terrifying thought to imagine if I was in charge of people's lives, Dr Bob. However, 2 pay rises in 2 years sounds like a pretty fair whack. Realistically, has this just been poor negotiation from the nurses' union and now they're trying to bump it up a bit by striking now?
Well, the pay rises you quote, I do not think make up for 10 years of stagnant pay deals. There doesn't have to be industrial action if the government agrees to their demands. So it's entirely within the government's control whether there is strike action. It should be avoided if at all possible. But this is down to political decision-making and it's out of the hands of the nurses. They are simply making their demands very clear.
Just very quickly, because Sarah Jane just alluded there to the idea that potentially if nurses strike and people die, then there might be blood on their hands there. Would you be happy, Dr Bob, for people to die in order for nurses to get higher pay?
No, I think you're misframing the issue. The decision ultimately is down to government, whether they accede to the demands or not. And the blood is on the hands of the government, I'm afraid.
OK, great stuff. Well, look, thank you very much. I did really enjoy that spirited discussion. Great way to start the show. Dr Bob Gill there, thank you very much. And Sarah Jane Palmer, thank you so much for coming into the studio. Really appreciate it. Great to have you on the show. No doubt, as this rumbles on, we'll be speaking to both of those very soon. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Keep those views coming in. We, of course, did have there a big debate on where people stand. Where do you stand when it comes to a nurses' pay rise or a nurses' strike? You can see a little bit below me there if you're watching us on the TV. Winter blackouts? Surely not. This is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys, because coming up, we've got national grid terror. Not quite. It's warning about households in the UK potentially losing power for up to 3 hours at a time this winter if gas supplies run low. But is all as it seems? Will the lights actually really go out? I'll be back in a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's exactly 3:30. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Power blackouts may have to be introduced in the UK this winter if the country fails to secure enough natural gas. A watchdog has warned. The National Grid electricity system operator cautions some homes may be without power for up to 3 hours a day. Coal-fired power plants are also being placed on standby as Europe struggles with a restricted gas supply following Russia's war with Ukraine. At least 38 people have been killed, including 22 children, some as young as 2, after a former police officer opened fire at a childcare centre in Thailand. It happened in the northeastern province of Nong Bua Lampu. Thai police say the gunman had been discharged from the force last year and just hours earlier had appeared in court on drugs charges. The gunman also killed his wife and his child before turning the gun on himself. 3 people have been stabbed in a suspected robbery in Bishopsgate near Liverpool Street Station. City of London police confirmed the victims have been taken to hospital. Their condition isn't thought to be life-threatening. The force is still looking for 2 suspects. No arrests have yet been made. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says Tory police cuts are responsible for incidents like this. The Prime Minister has called on European leaders to unite as she warns Russian aggression has caused the biggest crisis since the Second World War. Liz Truss has been speaking in Prague at the historic first meeting of a new political club of nations. She's urged the group to address the fundamental causes of energy and migration challenges. Ms Truss is now set to hold talks with French President Emmanuel Macron in what could mark a new phase in the UK's post-Brexit relations with Europe. Apologies that you are seeing the wrong images there if you're watching us on TV. This is TV Online and DAB Plus Radio. This is GB News. We'll be back in just a moment.
OK, ladies and gentlemen, well, it's Patrick Christys here on GB.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB Plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. The irony there that we're going to be talking about blackouts very, very shortly. But lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on the potential nurses' strike. Chris says, if nurses who are already well paid are given a high pay rise, guess who pays for it? That's right, you and me and everybody else who pays tax. People need to remember that not every medic, nurse, nursing assistant or cleaner worked on COVID wards. He goes on to say that he's spoken to plenty of people who work in the nursing profession and they do not actually need a pay rise. That is Chris's view. Loads of people have been getting in touch. Thank you very much. Please keep these views coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let me just whiz you through the reason why we're talking about this nursing issue is because potentially nurses are about to go on strike for, supposedly, the first time in 106 years. Some people have been emailing in to tell me that apparently there was a nurses' strike in the 70s. I've Googled it, I can't find it, and I wasn't born, so I'm afraid you're going to have to educate me on that one. However, the reason is nurses are potentially striking over pay. Now, 2 things here. Would you support a nurses' strike? Because from where I'm sitting, if nurses strike, people die, or people don't get diagnosed with things. Maybe, for example, they don't get diagnosed, a biopsy result doesn't come back. That could have serious, serious consequences for their health. They're saying that, don't worry, we'll make sure that non-urgent healthcare is the only thing that's impacted. Well, hang on a minute. What's non-urgent now can become urgent very, very quickly. Non-urgent can still be excruciating pain, can't it? It just might not necessarily mean life-threatening. So is that good enough? What do you think? Nurses had a pay rise last year. Nurses had a pay rise the year before. The one this year was 4.5%. The one the year before was 3%. Do you think that potentially there's a wider issue going on here, that we're seeing strike after strike after strike after strike, not necessarily for workers' rights, but actually just to bring down a government? GBviews at gbnews.uk. Olive has been on. It says the wages you are quoting are for a newly qualified registered nurse. They also have about £50,000 worth of student debt. Vast numbers, particularly of healthcare assistants, leave the job each year, and we are unable to recruit as they can earn more in supermarkets and warehouses. I absolutely take your point. And I am not necessarily saying that I believe that nurses are fabulously well paid. I mean, they're obviously not fabulously well paid. But do we actually have to pay them more? There's a cost of living crisis for everybody, not just for nurses. Do they deserve better pay for the job that they do? I am a bit sick and tired of the argument that because doctors and nurses worked their backsides off, which they did through the COVID pandemic, that we now owe them loads extra. 2 pay rises in as many years, and we did shut down the country for the NHS. How has that left us all financially? GBviews at gbnews.uk. Michael says these nurses knew the job they signed up to. There are many other workers who also worked hard during the panic, who either lost their jobs or who are still working for far less. Very on brand, Michael, is a point I made earlier. But let me know what you think either way, OK? Either way, because there's plenty of you getting in touch as well to say, actually, you do really get great care from the NHS and you do really think that they deserve a pay rise. And that's a fair enough argument. I just want to know why. I want you to sell it to me. GBviews at gbnews.uk. But we're moving away from nurses' pay, even though we're going to be returning to it throughout the show, because we want to talk about something different now, and that is the National Grid has warned households could experience a series of 3-hour power cuts this winter. It would mean consumers in different parts of the country being notified a day in advance of 3-hour blocks of time during which their power would be cut off. It's part of efforts to reduce total consumption by 5%. Is this a massive deal for you? I'll just slap a few candles on, I think. I appreciate that it's not ideal, but, I don't know, candlelight, bit of reading. Who knows where that might lead? Let's speak to Tony Lodge, Energy and Infrastructure Research Fellow now at the Centre for Policy Studies. Right, first and foremost, how likely is this that we're going to live in blackout Britain?
Well, Patrick, the key word isn't blackouts as such, it's rationing. And when you ration electricity, you try and get other users primarily to turn off first. You may even have to pay them to turn off. So we have a lot of energy-intensive industry in this country, whether it be steel, chemicals, and other sectors. And they could be asked to turn off or turn down their energy consumption first before we get to households. A key point here is that a lot of our society today is electrified. It wasn't 20 years ago, it certainly wasn't 40 years ago when we had things like the 3-day week and the miners' strikes of the early 70s. We are now a very electrified society, so when electricity stops, major assets and major bits of infrastructure stop too.
Hey, all right, I mean, how much would this actually affect the country? Because I suppose there is definitely an economic impact, isn't there, if people around the country have 3-hour bursts, or businesses or whatever you were alluding to there as well have to go off grid for a period of time. I mean, that shuts businesses down, doesn't it? And people working from home as well.
Yeah, it's a massive crisis. I mean, we put a pamphlet out, for what it's worth, in 2014 called The Atomic Clock, predicting all of this, unless policy changed. It's an absolute disaster if this comes true. In July, we had to pay 50 times the going rate for electricity to be imported into this country from Belgium to keep the lights going in London. That can't be overstated as a major, major, major example of an energy policy which has been going wrong for 20 years. We do not have all of the generating capacity in this country we need. We used to have. We have slavishly followed EU directives and closed coal and oil-fired power stations early, with no net replacement built. Now, if Cameron and Blair and others who signed those directives, fine, sign a directive, but have a plan to replace what you're going to close. They didn't and they hadn't. And fundamentally, we now face a situation which is what you've just set out.
Research fellow at the Centre for Policy Studies. What do you make of this back at home, or if you're listening in your car or you're watching online or whatever you're doing, ladies and gentlemen? How would you object to having 3-hour bursts potentially where your lights might not come on? Is it an excuse to, I don't know, light a few candles or read a little bit or, I don't know, do whatever you want? Anyway, Labour leader Keir Starmer has been in Wolverhampton today to meet with mortgage experts as the UK housing market continues to deal with instability. So 2-year fixed-rate mortgages have passed 6% for the first time in 14 years. The Labour leader is blaming the Conservative Party's mini-budget for what he's calling eye-watering mortgage rises. Here is Sir Keir.
The most important thing that we can do to help people with their mortgages is to reverse that mini-budget. The second important thing is to put in place the checks and balances, because not only was this a kamikaze mini-budget, it was done without the OBR, without the usual checks. That's why the markets reacted, and sometimes we talk about the markets as if they're sort of some abstract thing. These are investors with huge amounts of money who don't have confidence in what the government did 2 weeks ago. That is the central problem, which is why we need to reverse the mini-budget, and the government needs to introduce the checks and balances that they should have put in place 2 weeks ago. They're being totally irresponsible.
OK, well, somebody who's never totally irresponsible, sometimes just partly, but we're enough about Friday nights, is our one and only economics and business editor. It's Liam Halligan, who joins us now with On the Money. Liam, you were muttering away a bit during that Keir Starmer thing. I won't repeat what you said. What do you make of it?
I think it's disingenuous, as I said to Gloria and Mark earlier, for the Labour leader to say that the markets have moved, you know, entirely because and directly because of the mini-budget. The pound fell after the mini-budget because the pound has been falling for quite a long time because the dollar is rising a lot and currencies all around the world are falling. The Japanese central bank, the South Korean central bank, they've taken emergency measures. Their currencies have fallen a lot further. Having said that, I do think the mini-budget was politically tin-eared and cack-handed to lower the top rate of tax, albeit only to 40%, which is where it was under Tony Blair, in the middle of a cost-of-living crisis. It was bad timing and it was bad form. And indeed, the government has now reversed that bit of the package, spending political capital to do so. The pound has fallen a bit again today. It started today well above where it was before the mini-budget, by the way. And it's fallen a bit again today because an organisation called Fitch, which is a credit rating agency, lowered... Well, it didn't lower the UK's credit rating, as everybody's reporting. Yeah. The credit rating stayed the same, but the outlook changed from stable to negative. We're still at AA- credit rating, which is one-off AAA, which is the best you can possibly have. So we can't overdo the doom and gloom, but what we must recognise, and Keir Starmer's got at least a point here, is that borrowing costs have risen in the money markets. But again, that's not because of the mini-budget. They're rising anyway, and that has a knock-on impact to mortgages and personal loans.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head with something I wanted to drill down a bit deeper with you, which is just the narrative that's been coming out on a lot of media outlets and, frankly, from a lot of people's lips, which just seem to be perpetuating this crisis, quotes unquote, crisis. Oh, well, it's all doom and gloom. We're all going to be absolutely skint and freeze to death, and it's all because of what Kwasi Kwarteng announced. And that's just not true, is it?
I think the best word is disingenuous. Look, I don't begrudge the leader of the opposition for trying to make political capital out of a blunder by the government. You know, that is politics, that is democracy. You know, there are many other ways to run your countries, but if you don't like it, go live in North Korea, you know. It's a grubby, combative process, and that's fine. But I do think we can overdo the doom and gloom. Financial journalists like me have to be careful about, you know, staying straight with people. And to be straight with people, look, there's a long-term rise in interest rates. It's happening, and that is going to increase mortgages. And even if interest rates go to like 6%, and some mortgage companies are now charging 6% for a 2% fix, depending on how much collateral, how much deposit you have, who you are, and so on. But if we're at mortgage rates of 6%, a lot of people are spending, you know, a third of their income or more on their mortgage. And that is where we were in the late 80s when interest rates were like 10, 15%.
This is what I was going to ask.
It's not about... You get a lot of people saying, oh, in my day, interest rates were 10, 15%. We did well. We got through it because we went caravanning on holiday and we didn't eat avocado sandwiches like today's millennials.
Yes.
But the fact is that today's millennials trying to buy a house are paying as much of their income on their mortgage as the previous generation, even though interest rates are much lower, headline, because houses are much more expensive to buy in the first place.
Right.
So they're paying a lower interest rate and a much bigger debt. The actual amount of their money every week or month that goes on that mortgage is as bad as it was in the late 80s when interest rates headline were 10, 15% or even more. So this sort of intergenerational sniping, again, is based on something that is disingenuous.
Hey, Liam Halligan, there we go, clearing that up. But it's something I would like to explore with you a little bit more, potentially later on in the show as well, actually, which is about that intergenerational issue that I think people have got. I mean, yes, all right, it's tricky to get on the property ladder, isn't it? But I suppose, in a way, it should be. It shouldn't be dead easy. And people in the 80s as well had issues. It wasn't just dead easy to get on the property ladder then, was it?
It wasn't dead easy, but I would say, and I've written a book on this, that it is much harder for today's generation because today's generation need a much bigger mortgage deposit than they did back then. And indeed, the average house now across the UK is 9 times annual earnings. When I bought my first property in the late 90s, the average house in the UK was on average 3.5 to 4 times earnings. So house prices are just much harder. So it is harder now. It's always quite tough. You've got to make choices, cut your cloth, save for a rainy day.
Stop the avocado sandwiches.
But for some people, it is... And for this generation, it's far, far harder to get on the housing ladder than it was a generation ago. That's just unanswerably true. And that's why Kwasi Kwarteng, to go back to where we started this little segment, to use a TV word, he's been meeting mortgage providers today, and they are talking about upping this mortgage guarantee, which is the government standing behind mortgage loans in case the mortgage companies make losses. That they're basically trying to incentivise the mortgage companies to keep lending to people, even if the multiples aren't as good as they were, even if it doesn't look as affordable. And I think in the end, it's something that politicians want to do, but I think that is basically could be dangerous. You could blow another big housing bubble, which could then collapse. What you basically need to do, as I say, until I'm blue in the face, is you've got to build more homes.
We have to build more homes. Unequivocally, we have to build more homes. Yes, Liam Halligan, thank you very, very much, our economics and business editor there. You are now bang up to date with what's been going on. Right, just moving away from that now, and a story that was, well, I must say, it got me very hot under the collar, this. I'll read it out and then I'll tell you for why. So 3 people have been taken to hospital after being stabbed during a suspected robbery in Bishopsgate in the City of London. So forensic teams have advised in the last hour that has taken place, that those people are in hospital and the cordon remains in place. Well, within the last few moments, Labour leader Keir Starmer was asked whether London was safe under the leadership of Mayor Sadiq Khan. He had this to say. He said, I do think we need a joint response to all of this to make sure we lower the crime levels across London. That is a joint and shared responsibility, but there is no getting away from the fact that over the last 12 years, this government has cut the number of police officers. Well, it's interesting stuff, this. I'm going to get stuck into it in more of a comment sense a bit later on, because I was angry earlier on. I wasn't a million miles away from where this stabbing took place earlier today. And when it first came out, oh, well, it's not terror, it's not terror. Right, great, brilliant. It's fantastic news that it's not terror. But then it almost seemed to just drop off a little bit in public interest. And it got me thinking, well, hang on. Is it because we've normalised stabbings now? 3 people, supposedly anyway, trying to step in and stop a robbery, as it would appear, stabbed in broad daylight in the City of London, and that is quite normal, is it? We've got a massive, massive problem. GB News' correspondent Rosie Rye does have the latest from the scene in Bishopsgate.
Police are investigating a suspected robbery. At 9:46 this morning, City of London police were alerted to an incident, a serious incident, and by 9:51 they were on the scene. 3 people have been stabbed, 4 people in total have been injured. Now, what police on the scene told me today was that they believe someone was walking with their phone and then they were apprehended. At that point, members of the public tried to intervene to help, and that's when the injuries took place. There had been rumours this could be about a bike theft, but what the policeman told me was that this was over a phone. Now, 3 of those people were taken by London ambulance to a nearby hospital with injuries that the police have told me they don't believe to be life-threatening. The other person not taken to hospital had been pushed to the ground. I must stress, this police have said this is not a terror-related incident. There have been no arrests made so far, although there are 2 people of interest, 2 suspects. It's really been a difficult day, and a professional day for the working people walking past here, seeing blood on the pavement, and still quite a significant scene here and quite a significant police operation. This cordon's been in place since the incident this morning, and investigations are ongoing to work out who is behind this suspected robbery.
Yeah, shocking stuff, that really. Well, joining me on the show now is the author Nick Buckley, who's been campaigning to stop knife crime. Nick, great to have you on the show. Thank you very, very much. Well, it's a massive relief that this isn't yet another terror attack on the streets of Britain, but what it is yet another incident of several people getting stabbed over essentially nothing. A phone, supposedly, one of these things here that I've got in my hand right now. Someone wants one of these, and if you get involved and say, excuse me, do you mind not robbing it off that old lady, you get stabbed. What's gone wrong in this country?
Can I correct one thing? This is terror-related. If you ask any mum or dad in this country, they will tell you they're terrified of their child being stabbed to death. So it is terror-related.
Well, you know what? I like that, actually, and I'm going to start using that because it is terror, because it's terrifying, isn't it? It's terrible as well, to be fair. It's terrifying. The idea now that if somebody walked into even this room here now and said, can I have your laptop or can I have your phone? And I said no. Well, what? Hang on a minute. I'd have to say yes, otherwise I risk getting stabbed. And this is bonkers, Nick.
It's become so routine and almost an everyday occurrence that we don't even read the stories anymore now. I think the only thing different about this is it's happened in the city, not London City, I mean in the financial city. So middle-class people have seen this and rich people would have seen this, and they don't normally see this sort of crime and this sort of violence. And we have to ask ourselves, why is this happening? The answers and the solutions to this are very simple, but it takes a backbone to implement what needs to be done. And we can trace this back through decades now. This is about fatherlessness, no fathers in the home, young people with no direction, failing education, failing in life, looking to other gang members for leadership, for companionship, for respect. This has been happening for 20, 30 years, and this is what we need to address in the long term. In the short term, it's all about stop and search.
You've raised a point there that a lot of people shy away from, and I'm glad you haven't. Now, we don't know the exact specifics of the individual or individuals, I suppose, responsible for this particular incident, but what we do know, Nick, is that stabbing is now commonplace and that young people are walking around with knives on a incredibly regular basis. And then more people are walking around with knives just in case they bump into someone else with a knife. And you think that a big part of that is because there aren't enough fathers at home?
That is the root cause to most of our social problems. But one of the root causes to carrying a knife is, you've said one of it, it's the nuclear deterrent. If I think you've got one, I best get one. So we've got people carrying knives who normally wouldn't carry a knife but have been scared into it. And then people will also say, oh, lock them up for 30 years. That's the answer to that. But that isn't the answer. Longer prison sentences don't deter crime.
Well, what is it? What is it? More stop and search? Is it more... Sorry, we're a bit pressed for time, but is it more stop and search? Right. Because I'm sick and tired. You go and tell those people there who were on their way to work this morning, who ended up in a puddle of their own blood in the City of London, or young lads or girls in Manchester, in Birmingham, in Liverpool, and wherever, right across this country, parents who do not sleep at night because they think that when their child walks out the front door, they might be stabbed to death. And you tell them that stop and search is some kind of racist, bad thing. Surely not.
No, absolutely. And what stop and search does is it increases the likelihood of you getting caught. The risk of getting caught is what reduces crime, not the sentence. You don't care about sentences if you don't think you're getting caught. It's the risk of getting caught. We need to increase stop and search, but it is controversial and it is classed as racist, which it isn't. But there's an answer to this, a simple answer. We go to the communities who suffer with knife crime and we have a small referendum in each council ward. And if those people in those areas vote for more stop and search, they get it. So when the police are accused of racism, the answer is the people who live in this area want it, and we're doing what the people instruct us to do. That's how it should be.
Nick, I'm bang up for that, and I'd support you wholeheartedly, and maybe we should be picking up on that a bit more here at GB News and on GB News Live, where local referendums, really. Do you want stop and search?
Yes.
Do you want more stop and search in your area, right? And then if the overwhelming majority of the public vote for it... I mean, by the way, I question who says no to this. I can understand the odd person who's been stopped 18 times in their life, some of it by the odd racist police officer. I can understand that, and I can understand your gripe. But I can't help but feel like the vast majority of the people who are against stop and search are people who've got something pretty big to hide. Nick Buckley, thank you very, very much. He's been campaigning to stop knife crime. What do you make of that? Loads of you getting in touch. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Spot on assessment, says Andrew, who's just got in touch. Family breakdown, fatherless homes. There you go. We've also had lots of emails in, loads of emails in when it comes to a potential nurses' strike. If you are just joining us, that was what we led the show in, and we're going to be repeating it throughout the show as well. Do you back a potential nurses' strike? Do you think we should pay them more to stop those strikes? Margaret says, pay them the same pay as the MPs got. They're worth every penny that they receive. So should nurses be paid the same as MPs? Ian says, more politics from unions. Nurses would have blood on their hands if they strike. The armed forces get paid less for more output, and no one seems to care about their wages or lack of. Really interesting point and a good way to move this discussion on, actually, Ian, as this rumbles on about nurses' pay and nurses striking. Are we going to up the pay for the armed forces as well? Nurses do a tough job. Nurses do a damn good job as well, a lot of the time. A lot of the time they do, and they work incredibly hard. But they have had 2 pay rises in 2 years. Coming up, more on the Prime Minister Liz Truss meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron in Prague in just over an hour's time, maybe a bit sooner than that, actually. Some people say that maybe she will think he's a friend, or she will find out that he's a foe. After this particular meeting, we'll bring you the updates on it right here on GB News Live. Could we improve our relations with our neighbours? Do we have to? Were we all a bit rowdy with Brexit? Well, I look at it as they weren't particularly nice to us, frankly. I'm pretty sure that the people who died when Emmanuel Macron decided that he wanted to pinch some of the vaccines destined to us don't think he's particularly friendly. Stay with me, Patrick Christys here on GB News Live. I will be back in a tick.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Yes, people, this is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. It's just gone 4 o'clock. Coming up, is French President Emmanuel Macron a friend or a foe? We're going to be having a debate on that. He'll meet with Liz Truss in the next hour for bilateral talks in Prague. Bilateral, as far as I can tell, just means two people meeting in a room. But she's been in the stag-do capital of the world, Prague, the Czech Republic, all day for crunch meetings with European leaders as she plans to make headway on key issues, including energy and, crucially, migration as well. So, could Liz Truss be the Prime Minister to finally mend Anglo-French relations, considering we haven't got on with the French particularly well since medieval times? I highly doubt it, but there we go. Also this hour, the number of hate crimes recorded by police in England and Wales has risen by more than a quarter in a year. Now, the majority of hate crimes were apparently racially motivated, while religious crimes rose by 37%. But what's the truth behind these figures? I'm going to be getting stuck right into that with the former police chief superintendent, and I'm going to now trigger warning, people, trigger warning. Expat, the homeless, mum and dad. These are just some of the words that hundreds of councils across the country have banned, OK? They're saying we can't use them. It needs to be an inclusive language guide that's implemented. From the Local Government Association, they've also said the phrase "good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen" should be ditched in favour of "good afternoon, everyone." Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be asking, is this progress or just utter madness? Can you say madness anymore? I don't know. I'll be discussing that later in the hour, but before that, here's your latest news with the gentleman.
Thanks, Patrick. Good afternoon. It's 4:02. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. 3-hour blackouts could be introduced across the UK this winter if the country fails to secure enough natural gas. The warning from the National Grid electricity system operator comes as Europe struggles with restricted energy supplies caused by Russia's war with Ukraine. The Liberal Democrats are calling on the government to hold an emergency Cobra meeting to address the issue. Coal-fired power stations are also being placed on standby to provide extra capacity. The Prime Minister has called on European leaders to unite as she warns Russian aggression has caused the biggest crisis since the Second World War. Liz Truss has been speaking in Prague at the historic first meeting of a new political club of nations. She's urged the group to address the fundamental causes of energy and migration challenges. Ms Truss is now set to hold talks with French President Emmanuel Macron in what could mark a new phase in the UK's post-Brexit relations with Europe. At least 38 people have been killed, including 22 children, after a former police officer opened fire at a childcare centre in Thailand. It happened in the northeastern province of Nong Bua Lanthu. Thai police say the gunman had been discharged from the force last year and just hours earlier had appeared in court on drugs charges. The gunman also killed his wife and his child before taking his own life. Bangkok-based journalist Janine Phagnitam told us incidents like this are rare.
Thailand has a lot of drug issues, and the government has been quite active on that. But what I think is very important is to pay close attention to the frequency of the mass shooting is actually happened in Thailand. This is a rare occurrence because the last one that happened was in February 2020. That happened because a disgruntled former soldier, he started shooting at a military barrack and then he went to the mall. That shooting actually resulted in 29 people.
3 people have been stabbed in a suspected robbery in Bishopsgate near Liverpool Street Station. City of London police confirmed the victims have been taken to hospital. Their condition isn't thought to be life-threatening. The force is still looking for 2 suspects. No arrests have yet been made. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says Tory police cuts are responsible for incidents like this.
There is no getting away from the fact that, over the last 12 years, this government has cut the number of police officers. Yes, they're putting some of them back now, but they haven't even replaced the ones that they've taken away. And so I don't think the government can simply say this is somebody else's fault. Actually, all routes lead back to the government.
Hate crimes in England and Wales have increased by 26% in the last year, but police are prosecuting a small proportion of those offences. Official figures show there were over 155,000 hate crimes recorded by officers up to March of this year. It's the biggest increase in hate crimes in 5 years. However, only 8% result in a police charge. Around 500 emergency call handlers have joined a BT Group walkout today in a dispute over pay. The Communication Workers Union, which represents the handlers, had previously agreed to exempt 999 staff from the strike action. The CWU says their position changed after, quote, widespread outrage at the company's refusal to negotiate. A further 3 days of walkouts are planned to take place later this month. The union's General Secretary, Dave Ward, told GB News BT needs to join them round the table.
I mean, it cannot be right that call centre workers earning between £21,000 and £27,000 a year are having to go on strike. They're at a tipping point. The actual situation with BT is that they are refusing to negotiate. They've had 2.5 weeks' notice of this dispute. We would rather be in a room sitting with them today trying to get this dispute resolved than being out on strike.
At least 17 people, mostly women, have died after 2 boats sank in separate incidents in Greek waters. Dramatic footage shows some of those rescued being pulled up a cliff to safety. Coast Guards say 30 people are still missing from the 2 wrecks. It's understood one boat off the coast of Lesbos was carrying around 40 migrants when it sank overnight. 80 more were rescued from another, which sank late on Wednesday near the island of Kuthira. Kevin Spacey is due to appear in a US court to face an allegation that he sexually assaulted a boy 36 years ago. Actor Anthony Rapp claims he was the victim of a, quote, unwanted sexual advance at a party in 1986 when he was 14 years old. The trial comes less than 3 months after the Oscar-winning actor appeared in a UK court where he faces a separate 5 charges of sexual assault. Mr. Spacey denies all of the accusations against him. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Patrick.
Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Liz Truss pitched the UK as a key ally in Europe in the fight against authoritarianism as she spoke with the key European leaders at a crunch summit in Prague this afternoon. Don't worry, it gets more interesting than this. The Prime Minister used a 5-minute speaking slot to stress the UK's commitment to Ukraine and to urge her fellow leaders to seek out a more resilient energy supply. Well, within the next hour or so, she's going to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron. And this, frankly, is where it all gets a bit tasty, because with the main focus now tackling the migrant crisis in the Channel, the talks could potentially be difficult after, during her leadership race, Truss said that the jury was out on whether Emmanuel Macron was a friend or a foe. But what is the future of UK-French relations? So I thought, why not? Let's just have it out. So joining me now is Marco Vincenzino, who's a geopolitical analyst. Thank you very much, Marco. Looking very suave, I must say that. Marco, do the French hate us?
No, I don't think so. I mean, geography dictates reality. Economic reality, diplomatic, security, political. So I think right now with the meeting that'll be taking place, or the meeting that has taken place today, it's a new injection of diplomatic energy, you can call it, much needed. And so obviously the Prime Minister at home had a difficult start domestically, but on the foreign policy front, there is an opportunity to break the ice. And it's tone. Tone is important because tone helps to set a new beginning in a way, but the substance of the relationship, many of the difficulties still remain. You have the bilateral French UK issues, but you have to, I think it's important to even think beyond that. It's the broader European UK issues. And in that sense, Macron is obviously one of the leading members. France and Germany have been the traditional leaders of Europe, but you also have new incoming leaders, such as, look at Giorgia Meloni from Italy. She's likely to become prime minister within the next month.
Just quickly on this. Yeah. I don't understand why it's even a question as to whether or not Emmanuel Macron is a friend or a foe. He's a massive foe. He stole millions of vaccines that were destined for the United Kingdom. Who knows how many people died as a result of that? That's actual potential British lives lost, potentially. He called Boris Johnson a knucklehead. He has not done anything despite us paying millions of pounds to the French in terms of stopping people crossing the Channel. And he threatened to cut the power off on Jersey, for goodness sake. I mean, it's not very friendly, is it? With friends like those, you don't need enemies.
You need to manage it, and it's the reality. He has his domestic politics, and he's catering to that. Each leader has their own domestic politics. The rhetoric is quite effective, but today provides an opportunity to improve that rhetoric. Deep down inside, issues are not going to change. You have to manage them effectively, and that's what's required on both sides. If it's just one side, Macron himself, there'll be other European leaders who can try to make up for that in the sense of trying to broaden the dialogue between both sides. So once again, I'm not looking at UK, France. I think there's an opportunity for other European leaders to actually participate in this process, because the issues across the Channel are European-wide. France obviously is the first country across geography dictates reality. So the French input in that is enormous. It's massive. But it's important for Liz Truss to play a smart diplomatic game and to try to use her leverage with the other European leaders to try to, I'm not saying to isolate Macron, but she can make her case less difficult if she reaches out to the other European leaders and plays a smart diplomatic game.
Talking of playing smart diplomatic games, what's the view of Emmanuel Macron on the continent amongst other EU leaders? Is he actually a slick political operator? I mean, some people would say he allowed himself to get, as I would call it, mugged off by Vladimir Putin and his extraordinarily long table at the start of this Ukraine crisis. He doesn't appear to necessarily be a very, very great, clever political operator. Napoleon, he is not, is he? Although I suppose he's still alive.
No, he's not a Napoleon. But I think there's two ways to look at it. Before the February 24th Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then afterwards. Before, he also had an ally. And the strong ally he had was Angela Merkel. And Merkel gone from the and have Olaf Scholz, a new prime minister, not as dominant or as much as a presence as Merkel was. I think the strong alliance with Merkel kind of puts him in a different position. Plus, in other countries, like in Italy, you maybe have a prime minister from a...
Sorry about this.
It's
Sorry
not
about this,
particularly
Marco.
friendly. That's why I say leverage. She has to use her leverage intelligently with a new leader like Giorgia Meloni.
Good stuff, Marco. Thank you so much. Great to have you on the show. Always looking suave and ready to go. Marco Vincenzino there, geopolitical analyst from Warsaw. But can we actually salvage this relationship with the European Union? Do we need to be kinder to them? The reason I'm asking this is because I've been very taken aback by some of the rhetoric the likes of Steve Baker have been using recently about almost apologising, really, for the way that we were talking about the European Union during the referendum, appearing to hint that the only way we can get things sorted when it comes to things like the Northern Ireland Protocol, what's going on in the Channel, wider issues as well, is if we start sucking up to them a little bit, and I don't really like that. Let's talk now to Joel Relland, who is from the think tank UK in a Changing Europe. Thank you very much, Joel. Great to have you on the show. Can we salvage a relationship with the European Union? Do they want to salvage it?
Yeah, I think there's potentially quite a lot of grounds to improve relationships in the next few months. I mean, it's telling that this meeting today, Macron in particular, made quite a few compromises to get the UK around the table. There were talks taking place over the summer about kind of British concerns that it might turn into an EU talking shop, that it would be secretariat driven by the European Commission. And Liz Truss sought reassurances, which is what has led her to be in Prague today, that this wasn't going to be, EU enlargement by proxy. And so efforts have been made on the EU side to build that relationship. And like you say, also on the UK side, the tone has changed. It's become more friendly, more constructive. It looks like we've got two people that maybe were at rock bottom, but they're trying to pick themselves up off the floor a little bit.
Can I just say, when Theresa May was in charge trying to negotiate a Brexit deal, she was, and anyone would have to agree on this, very, very, very kind towards the European Union, to the point where they decided not to shake the friendly hand, but basically try and take the mickey, really. And then, obviously, we've had things like with the vaccines. Well, thanks to a lot of British innovation and British funding, we actually created a vaccine. That French one didn't turn out too well. In fact, the French one turned out so badly that they tried to get some of ours on the way into Britain. We've had issues there where the French president has called our former Prime Minister a knucklehead. when, yet again, the continent was under a military threat. We stepped up. The Germans sent some probably rainbow-coloured helmets. We actually sent arms. I appreciate things have changed, but for a while, as far as I could tell, it was EU policy to allow Ukraine to become Russian and then just deal with the humanitarian crisis. What's been going on in the Channel is we've been lobbing the French a load of money and they've done naff all for it. I'm sorry, but they've got to be nicer to us, not the other way around.
I think this conversation that they're having in Prague is a recognition from the EU that their system isn't kind of quite fit for purpose in the modern context of the challenge with Russia. I think the way the EU worked, you had insiders and outsiders, and that for them left quite a big risk. Countries that are sort of on the perimeter of Europe, countries like Moldova, Ukraine, obviously, there was a risk that they could be drawn more and more into the Russian sphere of influence. So I think there's a recognition that you need to have more platforms for talking with those European allies who aren't already inside the tent, inside the EU. And so I think to an extent that is facing up to the limitations of the system in the modern security context. And also there was a recognition the UK needs to be there. There's no point having this new platform if the largest European country that's not in the EU is not coming to the table. So I think, there is a recognition of the changing context there.
And if this is a success, and if Ukraine does manage to send the Russians packing, for example, if we do manage to come to some kind of compromise with the Channel and get the migrant crisis stopped, potentially, dare I say, even working together to tackle these migrant gangs, then I suppose it might prove to the European Union that you can leave the EU and be a success and still get on with them, which they wouldn't want, presumably.
Well, I think for Truss, this is definitely a reason why she'll want to be at these meetings, because, if we cast our minds back to the referendum, a big argument from the Brexit campaign was, we like Europe, we just don't like the European Union. And so this would be a really clear example of how you can operate on big international geopolitical questions without being a European Union member. So, it would lend some credence to that argument. I think that's why we're seeing Truss there. Would it be an issue for the EU? I think to an extent, not really, because, the biggest member that's likely to leave has left now with the UK. And I think there's kind of enough other reasons why the EU wouldn't expect a country like Italy, or France or Poland to walk out. So I don't think they'll be too concerned.
Thank you very much, Joel. Great stuff that. Joel Rellan there from the think tank UK in a Changing Europe. What do you make of all of that, ladies and gentlemen? GBviews at gbnews.uk. Loads of talking points so far on this show. Truss is meeting Macron, friend or foe. What do you think? Do you think Emmanuel Macron is a friend? Do you think he's a foe? Do you think the EU needs to be nicer to us, or the other way around? There appears to be a sea change in rhetoric from certainly our side anyway, some of the likes of Steve Baker being quite apologetic, it would appear, for some of the language used during the Brexit campaign and in the subsequent years. Plenty of people, and I'll nail my colours to the mast here if I hadn't already, I'm one of them. I think the EU have been downright rude and nasty to us ever since we decided to leave the Brussels bloc. And frankly, it might be about time for them to show a little bit of conciliation towards us. Where would they be now if it wasn't for us sending Ukraine a load of weapons early doors? Yet again, the UK standing up in the face of a violent foe. There we go. GBviews at gbnews.uk. But anyway, moving on from that, the National Grid is warning there could be 3-hour blackouts in some areas this winter to protect supplies for heating homes and buildings. They are requesting that households to use energy off-peak to prevent the shortages. Well, the Liberal Democrats have called on the government to convene the Emergency Cobra Committee to address the possibility of such power cuts across the winter. Joining me now is Angela Knight, who is the former CEO of Energy UK. Angela, thank you very much. How serious is this? Are we all going to end up, trying to warm ourselves in our front rooms using kindling and candles?
I think not. But the reason why it's more serious this year than most years, because this planning gets done every year, of course, is because of the situation in Europe and the absence of gas coming in from Russia and all those things we've been talking about all the way through the summer. Now, whilst the storage is full in Europe, that's good, the gas storage that is, there are two other problems. One is that about half the French fleet is down at the moment. By that, I mean their nuclear power stations, and that is their predominant way of producing electricity. And although some of those will come back on stream before the end of this year, nevertheless, France will not be the big exporter of electricity that it normally is. And Norway's also got an issue with exporting electricity. In their instance, it's hydroelectric, and dry summer means that their reservoirs are not full. So the whole thing put together says this is a tighter year than usual. Where the UK comes off somewhat better is, of course, we do take 50% plus of gas out of the North Sea. We do have long contracts with Norway, another 40%, and we do have terminals which will take the liquefied natural gas. So we're not bad. What it is, though, is, as I say, a different year to normal, and so doing a bit of preparation is a very good thing.
If we pursued with our net zero agenda, would it be more or less likely that the lights go off this winter?
The only thing that would have helped us is if we had built some more nuclear power earlier. I'm a great believer in the small-scale nuclear power stations because they can be built quickly and they don't cost, you know, the fortunes that we see of these big ones. And it's still something which I think needs to take place and people need to get on with. So that is the number one, I think. Get some of that nuclear back on stream as quickly as we possibly can. Get building again.
Yeah, 100%. Because I'm just trying to figure out, first and foremost, whether or not this is a little bit of scaremongering, which potentially might be a bit of scaremongering. But also, crucially, now we've been staring down the barrel of, well, a lot going on at once, I suppose you could argue, whether it's with Putin over there or, you know, general issues that have led to energy problems in this country. Whether or not it is now crystal clear that we would be more vulnerable if we'd gone even bigger with net zero earlier, because from what you're saying is what we need to do is go nuclear.
Well, every time you build a wind farm, be it onshore or offshore, you've also got to build the same amount of backup because, you know, it is intermittent and we don't want electricity 60% of the time or 70% of the time. We want it 100% of the time. So we closed down most of our coal-fired power stations, not quite all. We built offshore wind and onshore and solar, and all that's good, but the focus on having that backup has never been particularly strong. There was an assumption that gas would always be there and it would always be cheap, and all you did is switch back on a gas-fired power station. In my world, scenario planning is very important, and some of that scenario planning simply didn't take place. And just saying, oh, well, we should have gone for net zero earlier is actually just trying to take it from what is a practical situation into an emotional argument. That is the wrong place to be.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe all those net zero lovers can super glue themselves to each other for warmth, but meanwhile, I think I'll be doing whatever I can, no matter what. Thank you very much. Angela Knight, great stuff. Lovely to have you on the show, the former CEO of Energy UK. Right, we're moving back now to what is, well, essentially our top story of the day. There's a few big ones today, so it's quite hard to tell, but it is nursing and nurses' strikes, potential nurses' strikes. So the head of the Royal College of Nursing says that we should pay nurses a decent wage to avoid strike action. So pay us what you're worth, otherwise we might walk out. Now, it's balloting its members for strike action for the first time in its 106-year history. Around 300,000 nurses will vote whether to walk out over pay. They're calling for a rise of 5% above inflation. A rise of 5% above inflation. Bear in mind, there was a nurses' pay rise in July and a nurses' pay rise July the year before that. So that's a little bit of context. The result of the ballot is due next month, and I've been asking the great British public whether they think nurses should strike.
My mum used to be a nurse, and I think they're undervalued. They're providing a great service, and particularly during the pandemic, they put their lives on the line.
So they're underpaid?
Totally.
Do you know roughly what they're paid now?
Probably about 25 to about 35,000.
Yeah, on average about 34. So what would you pay them if you had a money tree?
I think probably, it's very difficult to put a value on it, but 40,000.
Well, I have seen their basic pay isn't very good, and I think they are too important not to pay well.
Roughly what would you pay them in your dream world?
I think it just needs to be in line with a typical salary in order that you can live comfortably.
I would say it depends on how much of the strike affects
the health care, yeah. So it depends on how long they do it, or if they're doing it for a specific amount of time, whether they have enough resources to cover the actual health problems and maybe emergency problems and issues that people could face. So when they are on a strike, they should still care about the well-being of the people that they are looking for.
Everybody clapped during COVID, didn't they? Let's clap for the NHS. And now when it really comes to it and people are really suffering and they need a decent wage for a job that is needed.
Right, well, a relatively eclectic mix of views. Worth pointing out that until I corrected her, one of the ladies involved in that, I think, thought the nurses were going on strike because they just wanted a break. So not necessarily everybody as clued up as they could be on this, but how do you feel about a nurses' strike? Do you think that they would have your support? They are paid a relatively decent amount of money at the minute, 2 pay rises in 2 years, some would say. Others would say, well, hang on a minute, they do save lives. Where are you on this? Would you support a nurses' strike over pay? Because if they go on strike, people die, OK? So what do you make of that? GBViews at gbnews.uk. This is indeed GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Coming up... you're not going to believe this one, people. An LGBT plus charity has accused senior politicians of fueling hate crimes against transgender people as incidents recorded by police rose by more than 50% in a year. Racially motivated hate crimes account for 70% of the offences recorded, but everything might not be quite as it seems. We're also going to be talking about a council or councils that want to ban words because they're offensive, and those words include things like ladies and gentlemen and the homeless. Anyway, I'm going to be talking to former Chief Superintendent as to why it's such a problem in today's society. I'll be back in a mo.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 4:30. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. 3-hour blackouts could be introduced across the UK this winter if the country fails to secure enough natural gas. The warning from the National Grid electricity system operator comes as Europe struggles with restricted energy supplies caused by Russia's war with Ukraine. The Liberal Democrats are calling on the government to hold an emergency Cobra meeting to address the issue. Coal-fired power plants are also being placed on standby to provide extra capacity. The Prime Minister has called on European leaders to unite as she warns Russian aggression has caused the, quote, biggest crisis since the Second World War. Liz Truss has been speaking in Prague at the historic first meeting of a new political club of nations. She's urged the group to address the fundamental causes of energy and migration challenges. Ms Truss is now set to hold talks with French President Emmanuel Macron in what could mark a new phase in the UK's post-Brexit relations with Europe. At least 38 people have been killed, including 22 children, after a former police officer opened fire at a childcare centre in the northeast of Thailand. Police say the gunman had been discharged from the force last year and just hours earlier had appeared in court on drugs charges. The gunman also killed his wife and his child before taking his own life. 3 people have been stabbed in a suspected robbery in Bishopsgate near Liverpool Street Station. City of London police confirmed the victims have been taken to hospital. Their condition isn't thought to be life-threatening. The force is still looking for 2 suspects. No arrests have yet been made. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Patrick will be back in just a moment. OK, here's a snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1186 and 1.1371 euros. The price of gold currently standing at £1,531.58 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 closed at 6,997 points.
Hate crimes in England and Wales have increased by 26% in the last year, apparently, but police are prosecuting just a tiny proportion of those offences. Why, I ask? Well, figures issued by the Home Office say there were more than 155,000 hate crimes recorded by forces up to March this year, which is the biggest percentage increase in 5 years. However, the number of offences resulting in police charges have dropped to 8% of the total. So there is a massive discrepancy here. So stats show that 70% of crimes were racially motivated. Religious hate crimes increased by 37%, apparently. Sexual orientation crimes rose by 41%. Transgender identity rose by 56%. And disability crimes increased by 43%. Joining me now on the show is Parm Sandhu, who's a former chief superintendent at the Met Police. Parm, thank you very much. Now, a lot of people might read these and goes, well, hang on a minute, the number of these so-called hate crimes reported to police is massive. The number of charges brought is woeful, it's 8%. But is there something in that? Is it the fact that the police are only charging 8% because most of these just aren't hate crimes?
I don't think it is that fact. I think that what's happened is police productivity has suffered over the last 10 years or so, because there are less police officers now than there were 10 years ago. And what are we asking police officers to do? Are we actually asking them to investigate crime, or are we asking them to fill in the gaps for other services that are stretched? Because don't forget, police officers now go to health emergencies. They go to deal with mental health issues. They go and do welfare checks. If you're having a heart attack, you're likely to get a police officer attend with a defibrillator. So the police remit has expanded, and so the productivity on the actual investigation side has obviously gone down. And when you talk about the 8% that resulted a charge in relation to the race hate crimes and all of these types of crimes, compare that to the national average of normal crimes like burglary, theft. That's 5.6%. And if you're unlucky enough to be raped, it's 1.3%. So all of those charge rates have gone down. And in this particular case, the hate crimes has gone from 12% to 8% in a year.
Well, some might say there's something in that, actually, that if the police spent less time dealing with, and I'm not diminishing genuine racism or genuine homophobia or genuine, these kind of things, disability crime or whatever, those kind of hate crimes, if police spent less time trying to chase after people who, I don't know, maybe accidentally misgendered someone or use their free speech to cause offence, then maybe they would have more time to go around to people's house and solve burglaries or even rapes.
Patrick, what I do need to point out is that on these offences, I read the whole report, 40% of them actually had violence included in them. So that's going a little bit further than, misgendering or using terms that are not acceptable. There is violence within those offences that have been reported.
And of those, are they quite well? Are they charged at a much higher rate then?
It's not differentiated into which ones get the charges and which ones don't. But that's nearly half of them have got violence. That is not acceptable. It doesn't matter who you are, what you want to call yourself. It is not acceptable to be walking down the street and be suffering violence from anyone.
So what I want to get to the bottom of is the charging is one thing, OK? So about 8% of these increasing numbers of crimes reported, anyway, are getting charged. But why are so many of them being reported? Is it because more and more people are racist, homophobic, anti-trans, anti-disabled or whatever? Because that's an argument here that would paint it. If people are reporting all of these things a lot more, it must mean that we're producing a lot more hateful people.
On the actual report, it says that it may be due to better recording systems, or it may be because more people have the confidence to report. But it does actually say within the report that there's been more discussion about transgender issues on social media, and there's always spikes in those type of offences if there's more discussion about particular areas. But in addition to that, you have got the lower productivity of policing in general, because policing isn't about actually catching the bad guys. It's become a political tool.
Is it just a simple fact, though, that frankly there are too many of these reported incidents for the police to deal with? You'd almost need a specific hate crime force, wouldn't you, the amount of these incidents that are being reported?
That's very dangerous territory to go down, because if you start talking like that, then you'd need a special force for burglary, you'd need a special force for rape, because all of the charge rates have gone down, and it's not just about hate crime, it's about all of crime types. So when you start talking about specific police to deal with specific issues, I don't think you can do that. You have to have police officers who are willing and able to deal with offences. Whatever the type of violence, whatever the type of category they come into, you need enough officers, you need them to be doing policing, and you need them not to be ungluing protesters. And you talked about gluing protesters earlier. Police officers are going to incidents where they're ungluing people off the motorways.
Yeah.
What a waste of police time. That's where they shouldn't be used, and they should be used to investigate crimes.
Well, I mean, I was quite a big advocate of using a forklift truck to get rid of those people, but apparently you're not allowed to do that these days because we live in a civilised society. But thank you very, very much. Look, great to have you on the show, and thanks for shining some light onto what is, I think, a really, really big issue, OK? So it's the fact that hate crimes, apparently anyway, in England and Wales have risen by 26%. That was Sandhu, former Chief Superintendent at the Met Police. What do you make of that, people? Because it's a really, really tough balance, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. I do completely buy the fact that maybe more people feel comfortable enough reporting hate and genuine hate, and all power to them. We want to live in a society where people feel comfortable reporting racial abuse, sexist abuse, all of that stuff. I don't think anyone could disagree with that. I can't help but wonder whether or not we also live in a society where maybe people take offence too easily at the same time as well. Not when it comes to things like genuine racism, obviously, but when it comes to things like, oh, was someone accidentally misgendered, or did someone use hurty words, right? And then in that case, do we really want the police to get involved in that? And then they don't bring charges, and then it looks as though we've got all of these crimes being reported and hardly any of them resulting in a charge. I'm not quite sure that those figures tell the true story. Let me know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Talking of emails, I'm going to go into them now because lots of you have been getting in touch about Anglo-French relations as Liz Truss meets the old enemy, friend, Emmanuel Macron. Of course, the French President, Paul, says The French have historically been foes. And even now, after things like World War II, I was wondering when someone would bring up the war, it's now. World War II, they still think they're better than us. Yeah, OK, fine. Trevor, how wise was Liz to stand at the back for the group shots? This was not being side or backline, just a wise position to take, as if you were standing at the back, there's less chance of getting a knife in it. I like it. Yes, we were going to be talking a little bit about this group shot, the friendship photo, as it's called, of the EU leaders and people involved in this particular conference in Prague. And, yes, we were wondering what the body language was going to be like. I mean, Liz Truss's body language, bless her, is not always the best anyway. You know, has anyone seen that curtsy? Yeah. So there is that. But we are going to be discussing what it all really meant. So she stood at the back, and I think that's quite interesting, really, isn't it? Because then she gets to look down on everyone. Macron has always wanted to undermine NATO. This is from Alan. He got in touch in the inbox. The Anglosphere and create a French-led EU power bloc playing Russia off against the USA. Britain in the EU was part of that plan. Britain out of the EU and aligned with the USA is a massive blow to his plans. The only thing I would say to that, I think it was Alan, is are we massively aligned with the USA? Joe Biden appears to be tracing his family tree back for millennia and deciding now that he's completely and utterly Irish, and therefore that means he has to hate us. So, yes, not convinced that we are massively aligned with the USA. He has apparently ruled out any kind of trade deal until we sort out what's going on with the Northern Ireland protocols. If anything, he's aligned with the EU, but there we go. Peter says, Theresa May was a soft touch with the EU, and look how they took advantage of her. Fantastic point, Peter, and a point I made earlier on. I am slightly concerned by the rhetoric in this country now, amongst certain politicians anyway. Former, shall we say, what were they called? I think Spartan MPs they were called. The ones who rejected all of Theresa May's Brexit deals, if you want to call them that. I think there's been a softening there, where they're saying, look, OK, we're sorry for mugging you off a little bit during the old Brexit negotiations and then afterwards. Almost apologising, really, for wanting a sovereign Britain and enacting the result of a democratic referendum, but there we go. And now saying, well, we need to have closer cooperation and friendship with our European brothers and sisters in order to come to some deal. Now, I can understand this. It's diplomacy. We do want to get on. But you've hit the nail on the head there, Peter, which is basically my point, which is we did want to get on. We tried getting on. And we have tried numerous times to get on, and it's not really worked, has it? They, if anything, have slapped away the hand of friendship. Well, coming up, as Liz Truss prepares to meet the French President Emmanuel Macron this afternoon, focusing on tackling the migrant crisis, I will ask, should we work closer with our EU partners? Loads of you be getting in touch with that. Let's keep that coming. MEP Patrick O'Flynn will join me, and leader of Rejoin the EU party, Richard Hewison. They're going to go head-to-head. Hammer and tongs. I'll see you in a tick.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Well, throughout the show, we've been discussing the Prime Minister's visit to Prague, which I can vouch for the fact is a tremendous, tremendous place. But to speak to European leaders about the challenges facing the continent. One thing that's top of the agenda, of course, is the migrant crisis, an issue that's been cast into the light after at least 17 people tragically died when a boat sank off the Greek island of Lesbos last night. We've seen similar stuff going on in the Channel as well, haven't we? Liz Truss is looking to make headway on reaching agreements with European leaders on illegal immigration and small boat crossings. And she'll meet the French President Emmanuel Macron in around 15 minutes' time. A chap who she said she wasn't quite sure whether or not he was a friend or a foe. I can make my mind up about that one, but we'll leave that for now. I want to ask if adopting a more conciliatory approach to the EU is a good idea, OK? Does Britain need to be a bit nicer to our European friends in order to get stuff done? Or, frankly, is it them who needs to be nicer to us? And here, to go toe-to-toe with this, is journalist and former MEP Patrick O'Flynn and the leader of the Rejoin the EU party, Richard Hewison. Richard, I'll start with you. Do we need to be... Good afternoon. Do we need to be nicer to the European Union?
Well, I think it'd be a good idea if everyone started being nicer to people in general. It shouldn't matter what our opinions are of people that are our allies, our friends, our trading partners and our neighbours. Ultimately, we should be looking at trying to forward the links that we have with our country in both trade, in both environment, in both science, in retirement projects. This is all things that we could do better. And quite frankly, taking a nicer tone, does it ever do anybody any harm?
No, it doesn't. It must come at great pains to you then, Richard, to look back and think at the way the EU treated Theresa May, the fact that Emmanuel Macron tried to nick millions of vaccines, he called Boris Johnson a knucklehead, and he's taken loads of our cash and done nothing about what's going on the Channel.
Oh, to be honest, Patrick, a lot of these ridiculous blown-up public rows are really meaningless. When we look at the substance of what's happened over the last few years, there's been a lot of spiteful rhetoric. I don't think any of our politicians actually really believe it, but it does have the effect of... what can I put it, energising the population in a negative direction. I don't believe that the EU really treated Theresa May badly. I don't believe that we treated the EU badly. I think it's all been public smoke and mirrors, and ultimately we should just sit down and get on with doing a better deal with the EU. Obviously, from my position, I think we're better off rejoining the EU, which is why I could not be more delighted that Liz Truss, or as Tim Farron from the Liberal Democrats now calls her, Agent Truss, has launched her anti-growth coalition. Because the best way to get growth is, of course, to rejoin the EU. That would give us an instant underlying 4% growth, boost to growth. So,
all right, you can come back. I'll let you come back with your manifesto pitch a little bit later on. I've got to get to Patrick O'Flynn. Patrick O'Flynn, of course, a former MEP. Do we need to be nicer to the EU?
Well, I think the first thing to say, by the way, is well done, Richard, for being a pro-EU membership politician with an honest name for his party, Rejoin EU. I mean, it might as well be what the Labour Party call themselves if they were actually honest with the public. So a point to him on that score. Do we need to be nicer? Well, as you have said, we saw Theresa May was nice to the point of... deference, wasn't she? And she got taunted, basically sand kicked in her face. Boris Johnson, with Dominic Cummings behind him, was a lot more tough. And, you know, whatever you think of the final Brexit deal he achieved, it was better than Theresa May's deal. And he achieved concessions. So I think it's about being hard-headed. I think there's a deal to be done here. Personally, I don't see a massive danger that this new European political community is an embryonic EU, although I do think Leave voters are entitled to be very sceptical of it. After all, Liz Truss thinks of herself as a great Brexiteer. She actually campaigned for Remain, and I remember debating against her in that referendum. So she's got to tread particularly carefully. My test is, what do we want from them? Or what we want from France is one simple thing, which is an acceptance by France that they will take back migrants that we pick up in the Channel. If they agreed that, they could cut all their police spending trying to stop the boats embarking. We would do all the rounding up. They would take them back, and that would knock it stone dead. So if he's willing to offer that, then fair enough. That's good faith.
I mean, is that fair enough, Richard? Is that a fair enough starting point that we are holding up our end of the bargain? We're lobbing millions of quid at the French to try and stop what's going on in the Channel. Is it only fair that they do more to take some of those people back, Richard?
No, I'm sorry. I think this is very much a micro focus we're taking here. We can't just deal on this on a Britain versus France issue. And this is why I genuinely wish well for this club of nations, because we have to deal with the issue of desperate fleeing refugees coming from environmental crises and political crises in the direction of Europe. And we have to have a Europe-wide policy on that. And when I say that, I don't mean EU-wide, I mean Europe-wide.
What about economic migrants?
What about economic migrants? Well, how do we know people are economic migrants? Most of the people I see fleeing from war, fleeing from terror, fleeing from environmental disasters such as the droughts in Africa, these are people who are desperate for their lives.
But you've just made the point. Just quickly, because I will let you finish. No, I will let you finish. I will let you finish, absolutely. But I just want to make a point there. Just because I'm a bit tired of people saying this, yes, you're absolutely right. If people are fleeing war or an environmental disaster or whatever the other example was you gave there, then yes, they are refugees. But my point is that's not an economic migrant. That's a different person, isn't it? But carry on, Richard.
Well, yes, but we're talking about people coming over in boats. And you're suggesting, with respect, that some of those people, at least, are economic migrants.
Yes, absolutely.
I would say the vast majority are people fleeing terror, fleeing torture, fleeing the potential for slavery, fleeing the potential for being executed because of their sexuality. These are people that should be welcomed into the European family, and we should do the best to try and get those people to have a future. Now, how we, for want of a better word, divvy people up between the European nations, this is what I'd like to see the Club of Nations deal with. But let's be clear, if we are sending people straight to camps like Rwanda, we are not going to be differentiating between the victims of rape and the economic migrants. And I don't think it's worth the risk of re-traumatizing some of these desperate individuals by sending them to a camp in Rwanda. It's despicable.
All right, Patrick, I'll bring you back in. Let's just broaden it out a little bit and talk about the Europe-wide relationship, not just simply what's going on in the Channel and simply with the French as well. I would find it difficult if I was the leader of an EU nation and a pro-EU person myself to want to allow Britain back in and show that you could have cooperation, because what that would appear to show, Patrick, is that you can do all right outside the EU.
Well, yeah, there are certainly some people within the EU, within the Brussels establishment, that want to make it seem that Britain is not prospering in order to keep the others tamely inside the club. I don't think that's a majority, because I think there are some very important things that the EU needs the UK for. And, you know, this gathering today is very much focused on defence and security. And after all, along with France, we are the nuclear power of Europe. We have the most effective and well-trained and best-equipped forces of any European country. To talk about defence and the Russian threat and what's happening in Ukraine without the UK at the table would be, you know, there wouldn't be a lot of point in a European context. So that's why I think Liz Truss, by turning up, by offering to host the next one of these summits, is actually doing Macron, whose brainchild this is, quite a big favour, and why I'm looking for some kind of reciprocation from him on the Channel boats issue.
Richard, your views on that?
In terms of this Club of Nations, it's still difficult to see what they're actually going to achieve. I really hope that Patrick's right and they do come out with a collective defence strategy that everyone could bind into. But we end up in this curious position in that most people's reason for wanting to leave the EU in the first place was because of political reasons rather than, say, economic reasons. The access to the single market, which did us all very good. If we're now going to join back again in a political union, then my question is, why don't we just go back into the EU? We can have all the economic benefits as well, and we can be a real member of the political club there.
Very quickly, Patrick.
Yeah, well, it's not a political union in that sense. It's not under a Treaty of Rome that mandates ever closer union. It doesn't surrender national sovereignty to a central bureaucracy.
Well, you're saying it's just the umbrella word politics. OK. All right, both of you.
Exactly. Well, any political agreement will need to be ratified, and once that's ratified, we will essentially have joined in a treaty with those people. It's just that it's going to be lots of separate, inefficient treaties on individual issues, rather than one overarching treaty where we can just have meetings.
OK, all right. I've got to cut in. I'm being told I've got to move on. Unfortunately, both of you. Thank you very, very much. Again, yet another thing we could speak about all day here. But look, both of you, great stuff. Former MEP Patrick O'Flynn and the leader of the Rejoin the EU party, which, no, is not the Lib Dems, Richard Hewison. Both of you, thank you very, very much. Thoroughly enjoyed that. Right, OK, moving on. So, I think you'll enjoy this one, people. or be so infuriated about it that you want to bounce your head off a desk. Following a new ruling, an 18-page guide has been sent to UK councils banning them from using terms which may seem very normal in everyday language, such as mum and dad, the words mum and dad. With the so-called inclusive language guide offering birthing parents an alternative, able-bodied, the homeless, and expat, there are also words on the banned list, with council chiefs, can we call them chiefs? Does that not offend Native Americans? I don't know. Being told that they should have an understanding of the role language plays in embedding equality, diversity and inclusion across the workplace. Joining me now is Sam Dowler, who's a journalist and broadcast. Is that a Christmas tree you've got in the background?
It was a Halloween tree.
OK, well, you know what? That's not the issue at play. That's offensive. Ban that. Anyway, right, OK. Sam, I mean, this is can I say madness or nuts? That's offensive to squirrels.
I think, first of all, it's, you know, there is some overreach in this giant 18-page thing. I mean, like saying you can't say mum and dad is obviously ridiculous. But, you know, language is amorphous and it changes over time. There are things that I would say 10 years ago that I wouldn't say now. And look at the languages your parents used or your grandparents, and some of it you'd be like, oh my goodness, you can't say anything like that now. So it is just a guide, and you know, and obviously, as I said, some of it is overreach with the mum and dad thing, especially because no one's going to be calling, oh my birth parents, whatever. I mean, like, it's ridiculous. So I think it's all to do with making people feel more comfortable. Who does it make? Can I just say, who does it make feel more comfortable? When I say I'm going home at the weekend to see my mum and dad, who's offended by this? Yeah, as I said, I think that part in particular is overreach. Obviously, when it comes to it is bonkers. When it comes to language about the homeless or about being able-bodied or disabled, etc., you know, there's. Well, you can't say the homeless. Yeah. But I would like to see. I'd like to see it. I'd like to see the whole 18 pages, and obviously, what is the alternative to saying somebody's homeless? Like home challenged? Or, unroofed. Unroofed, I think. Most of it will be to do with making people feel more comfortable and and feel more inclusive language. But obviously, when it comes to things like mum and dad, that's ridiculous. So just very quickly, Sam, you don't think that some people are too easily offended? Well, yeah, some people are much too easily offended. I mean, myself, I don't get offended very often at all. Clearly but not. I think you know, no, not at all. But I think that it's certain, like when it comes to like microaggressions or things like that, it's like certain wording people would find offensive, and you know, you might not, but somebody else might. No, Sam, and sorry, for want of a better phrase, that you were squeezed towards the end of this hour because, unfortunately, we had to move a few bits and bobs around, so massively appreciate you giving us your time. And that Halloween tree you got behind you has started to grow on me a little bit, for want of a better phrase, so great stuff. All right, OK, so we're moving on. Sam Dowler there. This is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Lots more to come in the final hour, which we are now into, pretty much. Truss in Prague. Yes, no, not in that way. She's there for politics, not pleasure. Nurses striking, hate crimes, and much, much more. I'll be back in a tick.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
This is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys, and it's just gone 5 o'clock. So, coming up, the Prime Minister Liz Truss, any moment now, is set to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron. She's in Prague with European leaders to build relations and cooperation on key issues, including energy, migration, and much, much more. The Prime Minister pitched even the UK as a key ally in Europe in the fight against Putin's authoritarianism. We'll bring you the latest from the Czech Republic summit next. I live for the idea that Truss and Macron are going to shake hands as a British stag do walks past, but there we go. The Royal College of Nursing is now balloting all of its UK members for strike action. It's urging its 300,000 members, nurses, to walk out over pay. A nurses' strike, with the result of the vote due next month. Would you support a nurses' strike? Do you think they should get more pay? Do you think they should get more pay, but if they don't and they go on strike, you wouldn't support the strike? You get what I mean. GBviews at gbnews.uk. And Elon Musk this week U-turned on his decision to back out of buying Twitter. So he's going to buy it, basically. He's now set to take over the company, and as a self-described free speech absolutist, he's suggesting reinstating conservative accounts banned by Twitter, such as that of former US President Donald Trump. Has prompted concern from anti-hate speech campaigners who say that it will be allowed to run rampant on social media, but we are going to be taking a slightly different approach on it, and I'm going to be talking more about free speech, which I think is a more positive outlook. We'll speak about that a little bit later on, but before that, today's headlines with the one and only, it's Ray.
Thanks, Patrick. 2 minutes past 5. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. 3-hour blackouts could be introduced across the UK this winter if the country fails to secure enough natural gas. The warning from the National Grid electricity system operator comes as Europe struggles with restricted energy supplies caused by Russia's war with Ukraine. The Liberal Democrats are calling on the government to hold an emergency Cobra meeting to address the issue. Coal-fired power plants are also being placed on standby to provide extra capacity. The Prime Minister is due to hold a joint news conference with her French counterpart. It's believed Liz Truss discussed illegal channel crossings with Emmanuel Macron, as well as their post-Brexit relationship. Earlier, she called on European leaders to unite, saying Russian aggression has caused the biggest crisis since the Second World War. The Prime Minister was speaking in Prague at the historic first meeting of a new political club of nations. She's urged the group to address the, quote, fundamental causes of energy and migration challenges. At least 38 people have been killed, including 22 children, after a former police officer opened fire at a childcare centre in the northeast of Thailand. Police say the gunman had been discharged from the force last year and just hours earlier had appeared in court on drugs charges. The gunman also killed his wife and his child before taking his own life. Bangkok-based journalist Janine Phaknitham told us incidents like this are rare.
Thailand has a lot of drug issues, and the government has been quite active on that. But what I think is very important is to pay close attention to the frequency of the mass shooting is actually happened in Thailand. This is a rare occurrence because the last one that happened was in February 2020. That happened because a disgruntled former soldier, he started shooting at a military barrack and then he went to the mall. That shooting actually resulted in 29 people.
Around 500 emergency call handlers have joined a BT Group walkout today in a dispute over pay. The Communication Workers Union, which represents the handlers, had previously agreed to exempt 999 staff from strike action. The CWU says their position changed after widespread outrage at the company's refusal to negotiate. A further 3 days of walkouts are planned to take place later on this month. The union's General Secretary, Dave Ward, told GB News BT needs to join them around the table.
I mean, it cannot be right that call centre workers earning between £21,000 and £27,000 a year are having to go on strike. They're at a tipping point. The actual situation with BT is that they are refusing to negotiate. They've had 2.5 weeks' notice of this dispute. We would rather be in a room sitting with them today trying to get this dispute resolved than being out on strike.
UK banks are urging the Chancellor to extend the government's mortgage guarantee scheme amid surging interest rates. The scheme protects banks against losses when lending to first-time buyers. The average 5-year fixed-rate mortgage is now more than 6%. That's the highest level for more than a decade. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says it's a direct result of Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget.
We had a kamikaze mini-budget 2 weeks ago. As a direct consequence, mortgages are going up, and not by a little. You know, hundreds of pounds, £500 is the average per month. Now, there are not many people, not many families that can afford that kind of increase. Sometimes these things happen because of some world event. This is self-inflicted.
At least 17 people, mostly women, have died after 2 boats sank in separate incidents in Greek waters. Dramatic footage shows some of those rescued being pulled up a cliff to safety. Coast Guards say 30 people are still missing from the 2 wrecks. It's understood 1 boat off the coast of Lesbos was carrying around 40 migrants when it sank overnight. 80 more were rescued from another, which sank late on Wednesday near the island of Kuthira. 3 people have been stabbed in a suspected robbery in Bishopsgate near Liverpool Street Station. City of London police confirmed that the victims have been taken to hospital. Their condition isn't thought to be life-threatening. The force is still looking for 2 suspects. No arrests have yet been made. Hate crimes in England and Wales have increased by 26% in the last year, but police are prosecuting a small proportion of those offences. Official figures show there were over 155,000 hate crimes recorded by officers up to March of this year. It's the biggest increase in hate crimes in 5 years. However, only 8% result in a police charge. You're watching GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Patrick.
Cheers, Ray. Right now, Liz Truss is meeting the French President Emmanuel Macron this hour, potentially now, actually, with the main focus on how to tackle the migrant crisis in the Channel. It's part of a summit with key European leaders in Prague this afternoon. Earlier, she pitched the UK as a key ally in Europe in the fight against authoritarianism. That's all Putin-related. The talks with Macron could prove tenuous, though, after she said the jury was still out on whether Macron was a friend of the United Kingdom. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I don't think the jury's out on that, Liz, but there we go. But what is the future of UK-French relations? Let's go live now to GB News' political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who gets all the best gigs, and this one involves being in Prague. Darren, what's going on? Is Truss meeting Macron right now? Have they had a catastrophic falling out yet?
They haven't. Well, weirdly, maybe not weirdly, actually, I don't know why I said weirdly, this is their second meeting. They had one in Washington, I keep saying Washington, in New York at the UN General Assembly a couple of weeks ago. They are having the second meeting now here in Prague. And earlier on this week, Liz Truss was asked, I was in the room when she was asked that question about whether Emmanuel Macron was still a friend or a foe, whether she'd made her mind up, and she insisted he was now a friend and that was only banter. during the summer. But you're right in saying that the focus on this meeting will be, I think, largely around migration. There has been a definite tilt from the government, maybe a realisation, some would say, that if they want to tackle that small boat crisis in the English Channel, it is frankly going to need French help. We know deals will be done in the task. We know tens of millions of pounds have been spent, and we know there is frustration among some that they feel the French have not gone far enough, but still the government feel that migration will only be tackled, as I say, illegal migration, with the help of France and indeed other countries in Europe. Very tragically, we heard that dozens of people died trying to get into Greece over the last 24 hours or so in a boating accident. And it is a reminder that it is not just an issue for the UK, but indeed for the whole continent of Europe. And that, in essence, Patrick, I suppose, is one of the reasons these leaders are gathering here, trying to agree on some big global issues at a kind of European level, not least of all also on the issue of Ukraine. We've heard today from President Zelensky, who spoke to the summit, unsurprisingly remotely, in which he said that we're now in a strong position to direct all the possible might of Europe to end the war and guarantee a long-term peace for Ukraine, for Europe and the world. The German Chancellor echoing that, saying that the brutal violation of the security and peace order that we've had in decades, over recent years, here in Europe, has been shattered by this, and that Ukraine needs, frankly, to win that war. So we've got solidarity when it comes to Ukraine. We've got an attempt to try and broach some type of solidarity when it comes to migration, and also this issue of energy security, which unsurprisingly is incredibly precedent today, given what we've heard from the national grids.
OK, good stuff. Darren McCaffrey there, our political editor in Prague. And I believe that we can actually, very shortly, anyway, bring you a clip from Liz Truss, who is in Prague, meeting Emmanuel Macron. But before that, I am pleased to say that I am joined now by Charles-Henri Gallois, who is the leader of France's Generation Frexit group. I got there in the end. Thank you very much. Right, OK, so Macron is meeting with Truss right now. Do you think anything will come of it? Because I think the jury is out as to whether or not Emmanuel Macron is a friend.
Maybe she's talking about Ukraine, where currently French and British government shares the same position. But for the rest, I think it's more talking, because when we talk about energy, you will have some interconnection within both countries. But about immigration, I mean, I don't really believe in a European policy, because the EU institutions are pro-immigration, whereas it's the European Union with the European Court of Justice, or whether also when we talk about the European Human Rights Court, which always gives the right for asylum seeker, even if the right is denied, to stay in the country. So I don't think the EU will be of a great help if we talk about immigration. And I think it's the main issue that we face between the UK and France right now. And it's a more global issue, I would say, because all the asylum seekers that we are living today, we are seeing today, it's not about asylum right. Actually, it's economic migrants. We know it.
This is it. And on this point, I'm very keen to get your views, because you are the leader of France's Generation Frexit group. So obviously, don't particularly want to be in the European Union. And you mentioned economic migration there. Are you then actually quite happy to see these, a lot of them anyway, economic migrants leaving France and coming across the Channel to Britain?
I mean, we have a lot as well. Some are joining the UK, but just to have in mind the figures on why it's now economic migrants and it's not asylum seeker. If you back in France, is in 1973, we had 1,600 asylum seeker asking per year. In 2012, it was 60,000 per year, and in 2019, it's 180,000 people asking for asylum right. Yeah. So it's not anymore something about to have one people from a country in war. It's really whole countries moving to Europe, or in particular to France and the UK. And it's a problem because I think, maybe you will share the position, but you can integrate individuals, but you cannot integrate whole country. And when we have neighborhood in France or in the UK, where you have only foreigners, these people, as they live, as it was the case in their country, you cannot have integration. Yeah. It's like two countries apart. It's the main issue. You can have immigration, but we have to reduce the flows, whether it's illegal or legal immigration. If you want to integrate people, we have to reduce the flow. And you have totally different realities across Europe. In France and the UK, you have an important immigration, and you have also an important natality rate. It's not the case in Spain and Germany, for example, where they will host as well some migrants. But when you open the flows,
part of the problem. I mean, I from what I could gather there, essentially agree with a huge amount of what you've just said. But I can't help but wonder, Charles Emery, whether or not part of the problem is that we're being told now that we don't have any national culture. So the French have a very proud national culture. The Brits, we have a national culture as well. The Germans have a national culture. The Spanish have a national culture, etc., etc., etc. But when you're told that you are just part of one homogenous Eurozone, as it were, you appear to lose your national culture, which I can't help but wonder makes it easier or more palatable to accept hundreds of thousands, millions of people with a radically different culture across all of those things. And you are now racist if you disagree with the fact that maybe integration isn't working.
No, you're right. The European integration is also to kill the national identities. And when you kill the national identities, it's a way to say you can integrate every culture, everything is different. I mean, to love your national culture is not to hate the other one, but I think all French people, or let's say the majority of French people, they want France to stay France. It's the same in the UK. It's the same in Spain, but sometimes you've got this bureaucratic elite in Brussels and even in national governments that wants another way. And that's why we are suffering immigration. And also when you have a different policy in a country, and as we are part of the EU for France, for example, when Merkel decided to make enter many people from Syria, they were in Europe, they were in the Schengen area, so they could go to Germany, but they could go everywhere else. And it's like a huge flow of people that have come to Europe. I think Douglas Murray written about it, but it's really true, and it's a huge problem for France, for UK. And
just
for
very quickly, very quickly. Sorry, because we're pressed for time. There is a meeting now of European leaders looking to help sort out one of the issues: illegal immigration. Do you just think that they don't want to sort out illegal immigration as a group?
I think it will be just talking, and they won't change any rule in the EU. They won't change the Dublin system. They won't change the Schengen area. So it will be talking, but at the end they won't act.
OK, look, thank you very much. And I would love to speak to you again, actually. I don't think we've had the pleasure before. Charles-Henri Gallois there, who is the leader of France's Generation Frexit group. Right, well, we've just been hearing that Liz Truss has called the French President Emmanuel Macron a friend. Ah, there we are. At a summit in Prague a few moments ago. Maybe that friend can, I don't know, apologise for taking a few vaccines that didn't make their way across the UK, or calling Boris Johnson a knucklehead, or I don't know, not really doing too much with our money when we asked him to stop migrants coming over the channel. But anyway, maybe just as a friend he could do that. Anyway, she told broadcasters in Prague ahead of the meeting with the French president, I work very, very closely with President Macron and the French government. And what we're talking about is how the UK and France can work more closely together to build more nuclear power stations and to make sure that both countries have energy security in the future. Oh, it's Macron who did actually threaten to turn the power off to Jersey. Anyway, right, whatever. We'll bring you a live news conference with both the Prime Minister and the French President very shortly. Yes, you heard right. A live conference with Prime Minister and the French President very, very shortly. So do not miss that. We have a bit of Truss and a bit of Macron, who are, of course, now friends. Anyway, the Princess of Wales is in Northern Ireland for a day-long visit to the region. She's accompanied by the Prince of Wales, obviously. Anyway, Kate and Will have held a series of engagements across the United Kingdom, meeting locals and community organisations, including, importantly, a suicide prevention charity in North Belfast called PIPS. But one local wasn't too enthusiastic about the visit. Check this out.
Nice to meet you, but it'd be better if it was when you were in your own country. Right, welcome to Belfast, Ireland. Thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you. Ireland belongs to the Irish.
Oh, well, there we go. OK, apparently that was something. Anyway, joining me now to discuss relations between Northern Ireland and the Royals is former Royal correspondent Michael Cole. Michael, there we go. I must admit, I actually didn't hear anything there, but what, there was some negativity towards Kate, was there?
Yeah, I think so, but she coped with it very well. I think she was slightly taken by surprise by those comments. But listen, Patrick, you don't need me to tell you there's been 500 years of bad blood between Britain and Ireland, and this, on the scale, is probably at the very bottom end of it. I mean, royal visits were always problematic. In 1966, that's 2 years before the recent troubles actually began in 68, the Queen was in her car and somebody on a building site, on a scaffolding, dropped a huge building block, which made a great dent in the bonnet of the royal car. So things can be rough, but they've been a lot better since the Good Friday Agreement of 1999. And the Queen's state visit to Ireland was absolutely a triumph in 2011. And Martin McGuinness, former leader of Sinn Féin, now dead, he was very gracious in his comments. He shook hands with the Queen. Mary Robinson, the first woman president of Ireland, became quite a close confidant and almost a friend of the Queen.
Just to interrupt, Michael, I've just had a bit of clarity about what this lady apparently said to Kate. She said, "Nice to meet you, but it would be better if it was when you were in your own country." Bit racist, isn't it?
I did hear that. I think that's a reasonably mild comment. I think it's people are entitled to have that opinion and to express it. And she expressed it in a polite way. She was happy to shake hands with the Princess of Wales. I think the Princess of Wales was slightly taken aback. She clearly heard it, but she coped with it, and Prince William didn't hear it because we live in a democracy. If ever there is a majority in the 6 counties of Northern Ireland to join the Irish Republic, well then, of course, the British government will take great note of that. There never has been to date, but at the moment, of course, in the Stormont government, the majority party is Sinn Féin, and it was noticeable at the time of the funeral how gracious, how generous the leader of Sinn Féin was in expressing her condolences to the new king.
Yeah, Michael, I mean, who's the real loser there? This woman's queued up all day just to say something rather polite / borderline racist towards Kate. I mean, get a job. Anyway, meanwhile, we have actually learnt now, I've got to put this to you, that this evening, that Prince Harry is among... I'm learning this for the first time as I'm talking to you. It's breaking news, this. So, Prince Harry is among a group that has launched legal action against the Daily Mail, the Mail on Sunday and the Mail Online over alleged phone hacking. There we go. Gosh, OK. Go on, Michael.
Well,
let's see Richard.
That's very interesting. Of course, there's been a long legal history of legal actions against the Mail and the Mail on Sunday, most of which, so far, Meghan and Harry have won. If you go back to the phone hacking incident, which was the one which closed down the News of the World, was conducted by the then royal editor and his operative, who was doing these sort of things, and they were hacking into the recorded phone messages of Prince Harry and Prince William. That was all exposed. Clive Goodman went to jail, as did the man who actually was doing it. And that, of course, led to Rupert Murdoch closing down after, I think, 150 years, the good old News of the World, which has or has not been reborn as the Sun on Sunday. So this could be quite a serious moment if it is true in all of those phone hacking allegations which came out. And I must say that I was one of the people who was hacked at that time, so I have an interest in this. In all of those allegations, the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday were never in the firing line. There was no litigation against either newspaper. So this very much
is something... Well, this is fascinating. Well, it's fascinating, Michael, because for a couple of reasons. Because This is breaking, so certainly we have to tread relatively carefully on this. Legal proceedings will ensue, etc. But just dealing completely hypothetically with this now, if phones were hacked, it could, A, make the public more sympathetic towards Meghan and Harry. It might make them look like genuine victims of massive rampant press intrusion. It could also potentially validate some of the things that Meghan and Harry said weren't true, because if they were being printed and they knew they were true because the phones were hacked, that's how they knew they were true. Gosh, I mean, it could go either way, this one, couldn't it?
For one so young, Patrick, you are very, very wise. And I think the wisest thing you said was we're going to have to look at this. It is big mischief. It's big medicine. If there is substance to these charges of phone hacking, we've seen what has happened in the past. It led to wholesale concern about the ethics of the press and a lot of navel-gazing about that. If this is something as bad as what was going on with the news of the world, then, stand by. We'll have to see what happened. But as I say, and I think it's important, the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday have never, ever been charged with anything like this before.
Good stuff, Michael. Look, thank you very, very much. Great stuff, that. Really enjoy our chats. And I must say as well, I'm always deeply impressed by what appears to be a lovely house in Suffolk. Royal correspondent there, Michael Cole. Right, OK, what do you make of that? Some breaking news there. Apparently, the Mail and the Mail on Sunday are being accused of phone hacking by Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. We'll have to bring you the very latest on that as and when that story rolls on, which, of course, it will. This is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys, and loads more to come up. A surge in hate crimes in England and Wales. But what do these cases actually involve? Is it worth police time actually pursuing some of these cases? What do you reckon? We'll also bring you the news conference. Yes, stay gripped, people, because there's going to be a news conference live, allegedly, with Prime Minister Liz Truss and the French President in Prague. I'll be back in a tick.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens,
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back, wonderful people, to GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. It's about to go 5:30, and I've got something big coming your way in 35 seconds' time. Lots of you have been getting in touch, though, very quickly. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Paul says, why does no one mention that the migrants, this is the channel now, are not leaving a country of tyranny, they are leaving France? Wait, rephrase that? No, you can't possibly say that about France. Matthew says, can we spell out the facts again about Keir Starmer's disingenuous, inaccurate claims that the budget is responsible for interest rates going up? It's just cheap political scoring for the tired lefties. Well, there we go. That's some stuff in the inbox there. Keep those views coming. We've got nurses' strikes. We've got all sorts going on. But let's listen now to Prime Minister Liz Truss, who's been speaking about her trip to Prague to meet with EU leaders.
Prime Minister, you decided to come to this. Does this indicate a desire by you to move closer to Europe?
What this is about working with all of our European partners to challenge Putin's appalling war in Ukraine, but also to work together on the issues that we all face. Huge energy costs, rising inflation, and also migration across our continent. So it's very important that we work with our neighbours and allies to face down Putin, but also deal with the issues we face.
Your focus is squarely on growth. The OBR says that coming out of the single market and the customs union was negative growth of around 4%. Is it part of your agenda to try and move closer to Europe, to try and reduce friction, to help exporters, to help growth?
This is not about moving closer to Europe. This is about working with Europe on issues that we both face. And we both face rising energy costs. That's why I took the decision to put in place the energy price guarantee, so people in Britain weren't facing bills of up to £6,000. That's why we're working with our European neighbours on doing more on the North Sea, on offshore wind, which I've been talking about today. We're working with our partners on more nuclear energy, so that we're never in the same position again of being dependent on Russia and Russia using energy as leverage against free democracies.
You may have thought you escaped domestic issues, but there's been plenty going on at home. You guaranteed during your leadership campaign that there would be no electricity blackouts this winter. The National Grid now says there might be. What are you going to do to make sure their prediction doesn't come true?
We're working very hard on energy security. It's one of the reasons I'm here in Prague today. We have interconnectors with our European partners. We're working on more gas supplies. We're working on building out nuclear energy, building out wind energy, so we do have a secure supply of energy.
But can you still guarantee it?
Well, what we're clear about is that we do have a good supply of energy in the UK. We're in a much better position than many other countries, but of course there's always more we can do, and that's why I'm here working with our partners, making sure we do have a secure energy supply into the future.
It sounds awfully like you're backing off that guarantee.
Well, what I'm saying is that we do have good energy supplies in the UK. We can get through the winter, but of course I'm always looking for ways that we can improve the price for consumers. That's why I put in place the energy price guarantee, as well as making sure that we have as much supply as possible.
We're now looking at new mortgage rates of around 6%. Fitch's credit rating agency has downgraded Britain. Both the Bank of England and Fitch's say that the Chancellor's words were in part to blame for that. How much blame should fall on your government?
Look, we're facing a very, very difficult economic situation. We have rising energy prices and we have rising interest rates around the world. The Federal Reserve has raised its interest rates to 4%.
But they both specifically said the Chancellor was to blame.
Well, what we're doing as a government is, first of all, making sure that people aren't facing gargantuan energy bills this winter. People were facing bills of up to £6,000. We're now making sure that the typical household doesn't pay more than £2,500. We're also reducing people's taxes, helping grow the economy. But of course, these are difficult times, and that's why it's important I'm here in Prague, making sure we're working with our international partners to deal with these very real issues, which ultimately have been caused by Putin's war in Ukraine.
Nurses are balloting for their first ever strike today. Public sector pay, you're going to have to keep it down if you're going to meet your spending targets. Are we heading for a brutal winter of industrial action?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank nurses for the fantastic job they do. They worked incredibly hard during COVID. We now face a huge backlog after the COVID crisis. They do a great job. What we have offered nurses is a £1,400 pay rise that was recommended by the pay review body. So I do hope that they will continue to work through this winter. But I do want to say a great thank you to our nurses for the brilliant job they do.
Finally, you're heading now to a meeting with President Macron. Have you decided yet if he's a friend or foe?
Look, I work very, very closely with President Macron and the French government, and what we're talking about is how the UK and France can work more closely together to build more nuclear power stations and to make sure that both countries have energy security in the future. And we're both very clear the foe is Vladimir Putin, who has, through his appalling war in Ukraine, threatened freedom and democracy in Europe and pushed up energy prices, which we're now all having to deal with.
So he's a friend, you can say that?
He is a friend.
Excellent.
Well, there we go. Liz Truss, they're in Prague, and she's going to be meeting EU leaders. She has met EU leaders, really, and indeed Emmanuel Macron. Hopefully, anyway, very shortly we're going to be giving you some live press conference coverage as Truss and Macron presumably stand behind a plinth and say how much they love each other. But Liz Truss called French President Emmanuel Macron a friend. Liz Truss has said that her attendance at the European Political Community Summit in Prague is not about moving closer to Europe following Brexit. What this is about, she says, is working with all of our European partners to challenge Putin's appalling war in Ukraine. And it is fascinating, this, really, because actually now what it appears to be, because it's not just about Ukraine, it is a bit about Ukraine, it's also about energy and it's also about migration, which are three massive issues that normally the European Union would have dealt with, right, I suppose, or not dealt with, depending on which way you want to look at it. But now the UK is being brought into this table. So fascinating to see, are we moving closer to Europe? Does Europe want us to move closer to it? Should we be nicer to the EU in order to encourage this kind of behaviour? Or actually, is it the EU who needs to be nicer to us? Either way, though, do you not think it shows one thing? That in times of crisis, actually, the European Union does indeed need us and does indeed want us there. And potentially, as well, defeats a lot of the Remainer point, is that we will be social pariahs post-Brexit. What do you make of that? GBviews at gbnews.uk. But one of the big things I've been asking you to comment on throughout the show as we hurtle towards 20 to 6 has been the potential for a nurses' strike. For the first time in its 106-year history, the Royal College of Nursing is balloting its members for strike action. So this would mean that around 300,000 nurses will get to vote on whether to walk out over pay. They are calling for a 5% above inflation increase. Now, a few points here, right? They have already had a pay rise in July, and they had a pay rise the July before that. The latest one in July was apparently 4.5%. The one before that was apparently 3%. This one, 5% above the inflation increase, is a hefty chunk of money, OK? It comes amid warnings that record numbers of nurses are leaving the NHS. We have reported on, everyone's reported on stories of some nurses, for example, quitting the NHS, going to work in a bar because they think they have more sociable hours and similar-ish pay, and they don't have to deal with life and death situations. But the trade union says the only way to stop them quitting is to pay them a, quote, decent wage. What do you reckon is a decent wage for a nurse, out of interest? You start on about 25 grand and you work your way up. You can end up on about 55 grand, for example, on that pay scale. The average, shock horror, is about £34,000. Is that fair pay for a nurse in this country? What do you reckon? Do you think that we owe them after the coronavirus pandemic? A lot of you have been getting in touch to say, actually, no, we don't. Thank you very much for everything that you did during the pandemic. But, you know, we did lock down the country in order to protect the NHS, and also nurses maybe go into their profession with their eyes wide open. All your views are welcome, of course. It's also said that nurses will continue to provide critical services throughout the strike. So another key point here is that they are saying that non-urgent care will be the only elements of care that are affected. Well, in terms of non-urgent, having a lump checked is classed as non-urgent. Maybe a very, very painful hernia or certain other bits and bobs that are classed as non-urgent are going to be affected. I would argue that's a pretty massive cost. Can nurses really, even if they are desperate for more money, look themselves in the mirror and say, I'm not going into work today because I want, after I've had 2 pay rises in 2 years, I want more money, and, yeah, it might mean that old Daphne down the road, she doesn't get diagnosed with cancer Really? Anyway, the result of the ballot will be due next month. Joining me on the show now is Alison Cameron, who is a patient advocate and a former health advisor to the Department of Health. I've kind of introed a lot of different elements of it there. First and foremost, do you think that nurses need to be paid more money?
Well, yes, I do. If they're so well paid, why are so many of them accessing food banks? Now, I had my first visit to a food bank today because I'm one of the freelancers who had to give up their work, and also my health conditions have deteriorated lately. I got out of hospital 2 days ago. So I used the opportunity of my visit to the Truss Trust, who are amazing, to ask them, are they seeing nurses coming?
Yeah.
And they said, absolutely yes. And that is clearly completely unacceptable and goes well against, your lovely provocative intro, which I quite enjoyed because I like getting fired up like
well,
that.
there's a
because this
fair
is
enough.
not just about, can I just finish? This is not just about pay, this is about patient safety. And I was an advisor specifically to Jeremy Hunt when he was health secretary on patient safety. Now, the workforce crisis is really obvious to me, having been in hospital, as I said, just 2 days ago. I could see it. I could see the lack of European staff, and would you believe it? That, I believe, is because of Brexit. So nurses are not doing this because they just want to look in the mirror and not.
How does it make patients safer by going on strike and not treating them?
Because basically, an underpaid health service, underpaid nurses, that impacts on patient safety.
But going off work impacts on them as well, doesn't it?
Staff level impacts on patient safety.
Fair
I'm
enough.
not paid by anybody at the minute, so I have no real reason to be sitting here. I have no bias. I'm not involved with the Royal
that's
College
fair
of
enough.
Nursing. I do.
There's two separate questions here. There's two separate questions here, though, aren't there? It's A, are nurses underpaid? Which, in your opinion, yes they are. Fair enough. B, should they go on strike? Because if you go on strike as a nurse, someone might die.
Well, the Royal College of Nursing absolutely is insisting that patient care is their priority. And they will strike safely. Remember the junior doctors' strike?
If you can strike safely, how are you overworked?
Safely.
Excuse me. If you can strike safely, if 300,000 nurses can go off work and patient care is not impacted, then nurses aren't overworked, are they?
Can I ask you a question? What other option do they have?
To take the paycheck and not go on strike.
It's not about taking the paycheck. They need to just have enough to pay their bills.
Well, just answer that, though. Hang on a second. Just answer that, though. If
you're not actually letting me finish sentences.
Well, I'm asking you a question.
Really difficult for me.
I'm asking you a question that I would like you to answer. If 300,000 nurses can go on strike and patient safety will not be impacted, then surely nurses are not overworked and overstretched.
They are overworked. I could see what was happening when I was there. This is from recent experience. I've had several admissions to A&E at a very well, it was Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, actually. And I could see the level of pressure they were under, the lack of, sufficient staff numbers, where senior nurses were having to beg their junior nurses to go and have a break. I was even telling, the nurse who was looking after me, can you just please go and have a break? Now, there's clearly a systemic issue there that needs to be addressed. And that's from personal experience. And I don't like my lived experience being, trampled on by your TV channel.
Sorry? I'm just asking. Asking you questions. No one's forcing you to be here.
Personal experience, and I will be supporting the strike just as I did the junior doctors.
Absolutely, absolutely. And me as a customer, as it were, of the NHS, for example, I think as anyone would, who's, let's be honest, as a taxpayer, would have the right to question whether or not more taxpayers' money needs to go to more nurses when, as we can see
Did you know that actually it wasn't the government that did actually most of the last pay award actually fell on the NHS itself. The government didn't actually fund all of it.
But
So
yeah, but
already
the NHS is funded by
NHS had to come
taxpayers'
up with
money.
that. You're doing it again. You're interrupting me, and I don't appreciate it.
Well, you literally interrupted me.
I'm actually enjoying it. I like being challenged
Again,
like this.
so yeah, okay. So yes, no, but seriously, I mean, but that's a bit of a self-defeating argument because taxpayers give the money to the NHS, don't they? So yes, I suppose if it finds its way to nurses, then there we go. But a lot of people might say, well, hang on a minute, what we did was we locked down, didn't we, to help protect the NHS and do what we could during an absolutely monumental time. And what an unbelievable shift doctors and nurses
We
put
did
in.
ban saucepans a lot.
Yeah, we did.
That
yeah.
was really helpful. That was.
Just interrupting again. And so what I'm saying is, if we
You asked
locked...
me on your show, you could at least be quite polite because I've been at a blooming food bank today, and that is not a good experience. No one chooses to go to a food bank. I can assure you of that.
I'm very sympathetic towards the fact that you've been to a food bank. All I'm trying to ask you is...
Sympathy is not necessary, thank you.
Right, OK. Well, and whatever you want me to be about the food bank situation that you're in. So people might say that that the country locked down to help protect the NHS and help protect nurses. And that has had a huge knock-on financial impact right across the board of the nation. The nurses were given a pay rise in July 2022 and a pay rise in July 2021. Now asking for one that's 5% above inflation as well might seem a little bit much given that we're all in a cost of living crisis.
I disagree. I disagree with the figures. According to the Royal College of Nursing, overall, it's a pay cut. Now, you need to take that up the Royal College of Nursing, but I'm not part of that. I know for example, the numbers of nursing students, that's falling rapidly. And now all the students that I've trained, they really were motivated to become nurses for all sorts of compassionate reasons, none of which were involving money. And that's not happening now. So we need to look into what that's about. Why is that happening?
OK, good stuff. All right, Alison, thank you very much. Alison Cameron there.
No, I've enjoyed it. I like being challenged, so thanks a lot.
No, it's all right. So do I. Good stuff. I'm glad that we part as friends. Alison Cameron there is a patient advocate and a former health advisor for the Department of Health. Good grief, right. Hate crimes in England and Wales have increased by 26% in the last year, but police are prosecuting just a tiny proportion of those offences. Figures issued by the Home Office say there were over 155,000 hate crimes recorded by forces up to March this year, which is the biggest percentage increase in 5 years. However, the number of offences resulting in an actual police charge has dropped to 8% of that total. So, basically, loads of people being reported, not a lot of charges. Stats show that 70% of crimes are racially motivated, religious hate crimes increased by 37%, sexual orientation-related crimes rose by 41%, transgender identity-related crimes rose by 56%. Right, well, joining me on the show now is Katie John Went, who is a diversity and inclusion facilitator. Thank you very, very much. And Katie, I believe that you have been the victim of hate crime yourself twice. That's what my notes say. Would you mind just running us through what happened there, please?
I won't go into the details of those. One was quite some time ago. It was a bad relationship breakup, and you get a kind of an ex-partner who goes a bit stalkery bunny boiler on you. And the other one was actually, yes, it was a trans-motivated hate crime and death threats on me and constant harassment. Ironically, it turned out the actual perpetrator, after 6 months investigation by the police, was another trans person. So that was trans on trans.
Good grief. Gosh, that's wow. OK, all right. So I suppose when it comes down to this, how do you feel as though the police treated your particular case then? Because I suppose when people look at the numbers going up of claims and allegations and then they see the number of people being charged, the inference that's drawn there is, well, the police aren't doing enough to stop hate crimes.
Well, stopping hate crimes and prosecuting hate crimes are different things. The police can't do much to stop a hate crime. It's the people who perpetrate them who need to stop them. They all need to be nicer, as we were talking about earlier. But the actual prosecution side is down to the CPS. So in my case, actually, the police did a very good job fantastic kind of support and investigation and everything else. And then at the last minute, the CPS decided it wasn't in the public interest to take it to court, and also it was going to be too expensive to do it. Had I been much more of a public figure, I'm quite sure it would have changed. It's sometimes about who is the victim rather than what happened, and is it in the public interest aspect. I think the burden of proof was easy enough in that case, but it wasn't in the public interest.
I'm sorry about this. It's quite brief, really, this, but it's a massive question. Is it a difficulty? Because some people's version of what might be a hate crime might not necessarily be a hate crime. So, look, for example, J.K. Rowling saying women are women. I appreciate that some people find that deeply offensive and hateful. Is it a bit of a tricky one, this?
Well, that's an easy one for me. Sex is sex and gender is gender. I don't have a problem with discussing those things. I can talk to any of those people. And I think there's a big difference between what is called a hate incident and then the incitement to hatred or to violence and things like that. And it is worth noting that a majority of those hate crimes recorded in those rising stats were public order offences and attacks against the person. So they were physical or they were aggravations and incitements to violence. And that is quite different to people having a Twitter spat. Those Twitter spats won't be included in those statistics in the same way. These are things that are taking place in general in public. Now, some of that is down to the fact that we have a far more polarized kind of society at the moment, and we're far more likely to have rival kind of protests and counter-protests and rallies meeting each other and shouting at each other rather than actually trying to find solutions. There's a lot of stirring of the pot, shall we say, and the rise in those hate crimes is across the board on different issues. And it is just worth saying finally that disability hate crimes is one category that people often forget about. But if you are LGB or T, you're 4 times more likely to have that hate crime even above that. And it is Black History Month right now, and you're 8 times more likely to be the victim of a race-orientated one.
All right, good stuff. Look, sorry to rush you now. It's live news, I'm afraid, Katie. I'll see you again very soon. Thank you very much. Katie John went a diversity and inclusion facilitator. Right, OK, rush, people. We've got loads coming your way, I'm afraid. Katie has been a victim of hate crime twice, apparently. There we go. But coming up, this evening, Liz Truss will speak in Prague alongside the French President Emmanuel Macron. And we'll bring that to you live here on GB News. We're back in a tick.
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Friday offers some fairly typical autumnal fare. Bit of sunshine, a spell of heavy rain moving south and some gusty winds. Low pressure to the north, high pressure to the south, and in between plenty of isobars. The winds coming in from the west, and this weather front in particular bringing some wet weather tonight across parts of Scotland. That rain could be fairly heavy, some blustery conditions as well. That rain will push into Northern Ireland and southern Scotland by dawn. Bar the odd shower further south, much of England and Wales will be dry. Be some clear spells as well, but enough of a breeze to stop temperatures falling too far. A milder night than last night, double digits to start Friday for most urban areas. It will be quite a wet start for parts of southern Scotland and Northern Ireland, and this zone of rain sinking southwards, turning things fairly wet quite quickly across northern England, parts of North Wales, before heading into the Midlands and South Wales come the afternoon. Quite a narrow band of rain, so it shouldn't last too long, but it could be pretty intense, followed by a mixture of sunshine and blustery showers. Ahead of it, East Anglia in the southeast, mostly dry for much of the day. Quite warm again, 18 or 19. But the rain will push in here, so a lot of spray and surface water around on the roads for Friday evening's commute before that zips away. And then we're left with showers coming into northwest England, western Scotland, and a few for Northern Ireland. That's how we go into the weekend. And that's really how Saturday continues. 1 or 2 showers for northwest England. Certainly we'll see some showers for western Scotland, the north coast of Northern Ireland. But for many, Saturday's going to be dry and bright with some October sunshine, lifting the temperatures to fairly typical values for this time of year, low to mid-teens. But the winds will be a little bit lighter than they have been. So the weekend generally dry, but we are going to see a change on Sunday. It looks like with more cloud and some outbreaks of rain spreading into parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, up next is Jubes & Co. with Michelle Dewberry, who is very much here in the studio with me. Michelle, what have you got coming up?
Yes, I am. I'll tell you what, I'm having a night off Liz Truss and the Tory parties. Yes, there's other things going on in this country, let me tell you that. 3 people stabbed in London today. Why? Because they went to the aid of someone who'd had their phone nicked. So I'm asking, would you get involved if you saw a crime? And also, what's going on, by the way? Why do people seem to think they can just do whatever it is that they feel like doing with impunity in this country? Also, India has overtaken the UK's economy when it comes to size. Why then are we still sending money to them? We need to look again at foreign aid, is what I'm saying. And free speech. The world's gone mad, and I'll be looking at that.
Absolutely. What's not to love? Michelle Dewberry there. Thank you very much. Jubes & Co. Make sure you tune in. Thank you very much, everyone who's been watching this. We've covered a whole raft of topics. I've loved every minute. Loads of people on the inbox as well. But right now, it's your weather.
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Friday offers some fairly typical autumnal fare. Bit of sunshine, a spell of heavy rain moving south and some gusty winds. Low pressure to the north, high pressure to the south, and in between plenty of isobars. The winds coming in from the west, and this weather front in particular bringing some wet weather tonight across parts of Scotland. That rain could be fairly heavy, some blustery conditions as well. That rain will push into Northern Ireland and southern Scotland by dawn. Bar the odd shower further south, much of England and Wales will be dry. Be some clear spells as well, but enough of a breeze to stop temperatures falling too far. A milder night than last night, double digits to start Friday for most urban areas. It will be quite a wet start for parts of southern Scotland and Northern Ireland, and this zone of rain sinking southwards, turning things fairly wet quite quickly across northern England, parts of North Wales, before heading into the Midlands and South Wales come the afternoon. Quite a narrow band of rain, so it shouldn't last too long, but it could be pretty intense, followed by a mixture of sunshine and blustery showers. Ahead of it, East Anglia in the southeast, mostly dry for much of the day. Quite warm again, 18 or 19. But the rain will push in here, so a lot of spray and surface water around on the roads for Friday evening's commute before that zips away. And then